The night is long, the road endless, and some stories are almost too strange to believe. Welcome to the Sleep Haunt, where truth and terror ride side by side. Tonight, we bring you 8 unbelievable horror trucker stories, chilling encounters from foggy highways, silent truck stops, and lonely roads where the real world seems to fall away. Before we begin, we've set a goal. Let's reach 100 likes on this video. Tap that like button now and help keep our wheels turning through the dark. If you're new here, subscribe to the Sleep Haunt and join us for every eerie mile ahead. Now, take a deep breath, settle in, and listen. The road is waiting, and these stories are hard to forget. Story number 1. He had been running paper rolls out of the mill since winter, a steady job with a route he could almost drive by memory. Rain was already threaded across the windshield when he eased the rig onto the state highway. The mill lights softened behind him. In the cab, the air was warm, and the low purr of the engine was a reassurance as familiar as a heartbeat. The night had that soaked look, as if the sky had been holding its breath all day, and now had let go. County creeks were high. Reflectors carried little halos. He set the wipers on a gentle rhythm and kept the CB on low. He never kept the CB loud, just enough to hear trouble at a distance. Every so often it gave back a rustle, the homey chatter of other drivers, a caution about a patch of oil near a ramp, a friendly warning of a patrol car tucked behind a sign. It was a comfort in a world of long, empty lanes. Tonight, though, it was mostly static and the soft shush of rain. A roadside time and temperature sign flashed too, 13 amperes, M in orange digits. The world felt sealed and quiet. He was alone by the look of it, and so when the voice arrived, it felt like a whisper layered into the weather. "Don't take the bridge," the voice chimed. A small voice, clear as a bell, and wrong for the channel. "Take the right." The small road. He glanced at the radio, blinked once, and then twice. The channel light glowed honest green on 19. He'd heard music bleed over at odd hours, preachers from stations far away. But this wasn't like that. It was too intimate. The voice had the careful pronunciation of a child reading from a sign. He thumbed the squelch down, then up. "Say again?" There was a pause, a hush, a little spill of static that made him think of wind under a door. Then, "Don't take the river bridge. Take the right. The county road." He checked the mirrors, checked the rain lines on the glass. The river bridge was still miles ahead. He knew the blue span by heart, its slow rise and long throat across water that always looked black at night. He also knew there was a county road that peeled off before it, less traveled, a 2-lane through low fields, one of those older routes that got left behind when the highway was widened. It would add time. It would also be quieter, lonelier, darker. He cleared his throat and kept his tone plain. "You got a handle?" Silence. His hand hovered over the volume. He could turn the thing off and let the night seal around him. But he didn't. Instead, he took in the steady tap of the rain and the hum of tires over slick. The mile marker said, 16. Then a sign. "River bridge ahead 7 miles. Another smaller sign dangled by one bolt, slanted. One of those temporary detour boards that gets set up and forgotten. He saw the county road exit sign 3 miles after, reflective and understated. The green arrow pointed off into an unlit slip of asphalt, a seam between black fields. "Right," the small voice said again. "Go right." He didn't know why he listened. Maybe it was the way the voice used the definite article, as if it were real, as if there were only one right and he had found it. Maybe it was the way the rain intensified ahead, a dark curtain that seemed to be hanging directly over the river. He eased off onto the ramp and felt the tractor settle into a different kind of silence. The highway noise slipped away. The wipers kept their small metronome. The county road was narrow. The reflectors were older, spaced farther apart. He brought his speed down and kept the tires centered. A careful balance. He could feel the rolls behind him, wait like a patient animal. Ditches ran on either side, full and running. Far off, lightning stitched through cloud, quiet and contained. The radio kept its low hum, but there were no more words. He kept going because stopping felt wrong, because going back felt stranger than pushing forward into the dark. A white farmhouse appeared just beyond the glassy surface of a flooded field. It had a porch swing and a light burning in one window, the kind of light people leave out of habit, an anchor against empty rooms. The swing creaked once and fell still as he passed. He told himself it was the wind. The county road turned, then turned again, a slow, wandering path through fields and half-buried fence lines. He rode the inside of the lane like a careful seamstress, threading the rig along without touching the edges. He kept expecting to hear more from the radio. The silence pressed, heavy but not hostile. He went by the skeleton of a fruit stand, its signboard blank and rain-polished, and a little church with a clutch of cars whose plate numbers meant nothing. Somewhere he could smell wood smoke. He had the sense of being watched, but not in a dangerous way, more like being noticed. At a low point in the road, he saw water begin to feather over the asphalt. He eased down even further and felt the front tires cut through it with a gentle hiss. The flood was thin, where the field bled into the lane. He took it slow. He pictured the axle. He pictured the brakes. He pictured himself in the morning, telling the daylight version of this story that made it sound calm. "Don't stop on bridges," the small voice said, close enough now that he glanced down at the radio, as if it had leaned toward him. Not tonight. He passed a small bridge a minute later, just a short concrete span with no rails over what was, under normal hours, only a ditch. He did not stop. The word "not tonight" clung like damp cloth. When the road returned to the highway, it did so without ceremony. The ramp came up, dark and slick. The highway lanes were empty. As his tires climbed, he felt as if he were rising into a different weather. The rain thinned. The sky lightened just enough to show where cloud ended, and darker cloud began. He checked the mirror and saw only his own trailer, and the line he had cut through a black world. Back on the highway, the signs were bright again. He saw the angle of the river bridge ahead. He braced for the sight of flares, cones, patrol cars. Some explanation for the warning. Instead, nothing. The rise was as it always was. The arch was a shadow against darker water. Still, the hair at the base of his neck lifted. He took the far right lane and kept a safe distance. Halfway up the incline, lightning threaded across the belly of the clouds and froze the span in white for a heartbeat. In that flash, he thought he saw the middle of the bridge look slick in a way that wasn't rain. He thought he saw a wide, shallow shine where there shouldn't be one. He thought he saw the reflection of his own headlights in a place that would only reflect if there was nothing to catch them. But then the darkness folded over it, and the rain softened again, and his tires purred, and the rig rolled across. He breathed out when the descent took hold. He told the sensation to settle down. He took the next exit for a truck stop that sat like a yellow island at the edge of the river's bend. The sign was a beacon, coffee and showers, and a quiet corner where people traded maps of the night with their voices. He pulled in under light. Diesel pumps stood like quiet sentries. He set the brake, let the engine idle down, and sat for a moment listening. The radio remained a patient hush. He thumbed the power off, and then found himself turning it back on because the silence had grown too complete. He went inside, and the warmth of the place closed around him. Coffee smell, a chalkboard listing soup, a sleepy cashier, a bulletin board with printed flyers for lost dogs and temporary drivers. A handful of other long-haul folks drifted in clusters, talking in low tones. "How's it look upriver?" someone asked near the pastry case. "County's got trucks out," said another. "Heard they closed the old road hours ago. You see what the river's doing? Took out that old abutment. They're talking about the big bridge now." "The big bridge?" someone else asked, skeptical, as if that was a sacred piece of the world. "On the scanner," the man said. "Said the middle's not right, like a bad seam." The driver listened without interrupting. The bad seam phrase slid under his skin. He took his coffee to a booth by a window and watched the wet sheen of the lot. Another driver joined him. Because this was how these places worked, the stranger traded names, routes, bits of mutual comfort, said in a soft baritone. "You come in from east?" the stranger asked. "County Road," he said, not sure why he admitted it. "Skip the main for a bit." "Good call," the stranger said. "They say a pickup stopped up there to film the river, right on the crown. Folks get curious. Water's mean, though. Sneaks up on you when everything's black." No one said more than that because there was nothing more useful to say. The strange thing hung in the room without needing explanation. and the rain drew a curtain on the windows. He finished his coffee and went back out. The night had shifted while he was inside. It had thinned somehow, as if a pressure had let up. The air smelled more like wet grass than river. He checked the trailer seals good. He checked his tires good. Habit brought his eyes to every latch and strap. As he rounded the cab, he paused, because a faint lullaby threaded through the rain. He tilted his head to find the source. The CB crackled. The melody was simple, the sort a parent hums without thinking while packing lunches or sweeping the floor. It was a tune he couldn't place but felt he had known forever. "Home now," the small voice said, no more than a breath, and then the radio went flat, as if someone had cleared the table. He reached in and toggled the power in a reflex he didn't understand. The display blinked to life. 19. Volume low. He turned the knob slowly and found the emergency channel. Static, then silence. He pictured a small hand reaching toward a console that didn't belong to it, and the thought didn't frighten him. It made him feel like he had followed instructions and avoided causing a story for someone else to tell at dawn with a tremble in it. He finished the run in steady weather. Morning edged the horizon in a spill of pewter light. The mill on the far side of the county took the rolls and stamped his paperwork with the soft efficiency of a day shift beginning. He didn't mention the voice in the office with its bulletin boards and calendars and reminder notes. He kept it folded away like a postcard in a jacket pocket. Days later, not at night, but in that soft, quiet hour after lunch, when people lean back and the world moves slower, he sat in a different truck stop and saw footage on a mounted television. The river bridge stood framed by caution tape and flashing lights. The screen showed an aerial shot. The anchor mentioned a failure in a section of the span, words like compromise and structural anomaly. No footage of catastrophe, only careful language and the camera's polite distance. He spoke to a maintenance man who'd spent years with the county and knew the bridge as a neighbor. "My aunt used to tell us not to stop up there," the man said conversationally. "Said if the river wanted you, it would speak polite, and then it would take what it asked for. She'd tap the dash and tell us, 'Keep it moving.' Funny to hear your elders in your head when there's a caution sign and a deputy waving you on." She said that voice saved her once. Then she'd laugh and tell us to quit rolling our eyes. That night, back in his own cab, when he slid into the driver's seat and turned the key, the radio woke like always. For the briefest second, before static found its usual shape, he heard the tail end of that lullaby, almost lost in the hum of circuits and the click of relays. It wasn't a ghost sound that made his hair rise. It was an old habit sound, like the kitchen light left on in a farmhouse near a flooded field. Something meant for comfort. He did not try to explain it to anyone. The next time rain painted the night with moving glass, he kept the CB on. When a voice that didn't match the night offered a gentle correction, he took it without argument. He learned the small difference between superstition and attention. A bridge is only a bridge until the weather asks too much of it. And a detour is only a waste of time until it isn't. There are worse things than arriving late. There are stranger things than a child's voice on a frequency meant for traffic and jokes and warnings passed like bread from table to table. He held the wheel, listened, and let the miles open like pages turned slow and careful so nothing would tear. After he parked one morning, exhausted and safe, he scrolled through the dash camera's footage from that rain-soaked night. It showed the familiar curve of the highway, the gloss of the road, the faint glimmer of reflectors. It showed the county road, narrow as a ribbon and patient under his headlights. It showed nothing dramatic, no surprise. But when the frame reached the bridge, there was a flicker, as if a single frame belonged to a different scene and had been spliced in. The reflected shine on an empty span made his breath catch. Then it was gone, and the steady hum of road returned. He closed the laptop and let the sound of morning carry him to sleep. Out in the world, the bridge wore cones and temporary braces, and a tidy web of caution ribbon that fluttered like flags. The county report would later use phrases that kept dinner tables comfortable, but in cabins and coffee counters and the rooms where drivers nap between runs, people would say it plain. Sometimes the night gives simple instructions, and the best thing a person can do is follow them. Story number 2. She liked this route because the night got big out here. The road drifted across flats and low mesas like a quiet ribbon left on a table after a party. There was room to think, and the sky put on a patient show. Constellations like faint chalk, a planet steady over the horizon, the moon thin as a fingernail. The truck made its own company engine, humming a note that never quite changed. A soft rattle where a pen sat in the cup holder, the occasional tick of a cooling vent. She kept the radio low, not off, just low, so voices would be a texture and not a wall. The state line sat ahead in a clean arc of sodium light. A way station lived there, a plain block of a building pushed back from the lanes, the kind of place almost every driver could diagram from memory. Scale pads sunk flush in concrete, a green open sign when it was staffed, a blacked-out panel when it wasn't. She'd run this line all year and never seen it open past 10. Everything about it said, day business, clipboard business, the sort where coffee went cold in paper cups by the glass window. Tonight the open sign glowed. Not LED, not crisp. Old glass tubes lit the word in a soft humming green, the color of bottle glass. A hand-painted board beside it repeated the message in white letters. All trucks must enter. The arrow felt polite, then steady. She slowed, flicked on her blinker, and took the ramp. The scale house window held a basin of light. A moth traced an evenly spaced figure 8 against the glass, as if drawing a map. The platform rose under her wheels with that quiet gravity of heavy things touching heavy things. The needle on the big round scale, visible through a dusty pane, twitched and came to rest like a hunt dog scenting and then deciding. She rolled to a stop when the sign instructed. The speaker in the pedestal crackled. "Cab door, please." The voice had the easy clarity of someone who had said the same words 1,000 times. She set the brake, eased down, and opened the door. Night air moved around her like a river, cool with a mineral smell that meant high desert, recent wind, a little rain somewhere far off. The scale house door opened, and a man stepped out wearing a uniform that was correct but old by half a pattern. The patch on his sleeve showed the state crest stitched by hand in thread that had faded to storm cloud colors. His hair was iron gray and extremely neat. The lines around his eyes made him look like he had smiled a lot and then stopped for a while. "Evening," he said. "How are you set?" "Sealed and strapped," she answered habit. "Paper goods out of the valley. Due west before noon." He nodded once, as if confirming information already written down. He did not carry a tablet. His clipboard had paper clip to it, with a binder clip that looked like it could keep a door shut if it had to. He came close enough to be heard, but not so close she felt crowded, which told her he knew the shape of this job. "Let's have your bills," he said. And when she passed them over, he scanned the pages with economy. He didn't read so much as remember. "We're going to run you through and check your markers. Be a minute." He glanced up. "You'll want your window shut through the wind corridor tonight." "Which mile markers?" she asked before she could stop herself. It wasn't that she disagreed. It was that the phrase, wind corridor, carried a weight she couldn't quite define. 220 onto 223, he said, and wrote it neatly at the top of her paperwork. "If you hear anything on your passenger side, ignore it. If you see anyone flagging in the median, do not stop to render assistance. Troopers are staged beyond the hill." He handed her an orange tag with a hole punched near one edge. "Put this on your rear view until mile 224. You'll be beyond it by then. When you get where you're going, have them keep this. It'll make sense." She glanced at the tag. It was heavy paper, the sort that takes ink well. Something like a waltz drifted from the scale house, a staticky 3-step melody from a radio that was small and old enough to be made entirely of metal and glass. The music made the moth stop and hold its place, wings a blur. Inside, the scale house looked like a place that believed more in pencils than in passwords. A barometer hung next to a clock. The clock said 12:03. The second hand never touched the mark. It hovered a fraction shy and then swung on. Polaroids were pinned to a corkboard trucks at this very platform. Drivers smiling or not smiling. The same block of asphalt under different seasons of light. A chalkboard held a column labeled advisories and a column labeled notes. Under advisories, someone had written, "Birds low, sand carrying voice, gusts from the east." Under notes, "Measure twice, roll once." He checked her wheelbase with a wooden rule that folded into itself like a bit of origami. He tapped 2 bolts at the coupler with a small brass hammer and listened the way a piano tuner listens. He walked to the back and ran his fingers along the door latch, then paused as if a thought had risen, and reached into a drawer set into the pedestal. When he returned, he held a small, unassuming piece of metal, a round lead seal on a thin wire, the kind used to secure meters and old padlocks. The seal had a stamped emblem, a star and a scale, neither quite like the ones she recognized from the state's newer logos. "May I?" he asked, and when she nodded, he fixed the seal to the hasp beside her actual lock, threading it with care, and then squeezing it shut with a tool that left a crisp impression of the emblem. He clipped the tail of the wire and curled the end neatly. The lead held a faint warmth from his hand. "They like to loosen themselves," he said, almost conversational. "Not the big ones, the marker bolts." He tapped the coupler again and tilted his head, listening. "You'll be grateful for the seal when the gusts throw their shoulder at you. Do not honk. It invites them." "Invites what?" she asked, not sure why she kept pushing. He considered and then didn't answer with a noun. "Keep it quiet and keep it moving," he said. "And if your radio picks up a waltz, let it. That just means you're inside our reach for a while. Don't change the station until you're through. People get friendly at that hour. They'll wave. They'll look like they need a hand. You'll see it already, so you don't need it explained." She signed where he asked, 3 places, a pen that wrote like silk. He stamped the top page with a metal stamp that clicked more satisfyingly than it had to. The stamp left a neat date that wasn't today's date if she was reading it right. It looked like a way dates used to be written in an order she'd seen on old invoices in old offices. She let that detail walk past. "Any livestock?" he asked, a standard question delivered with a not quite standard tone. "No." "Any batteries?" "No." "Any singing from the load?" His eyes were steady. He could have been asking about load weight or chains. "No," she said with a small smile that died in the air between them when he didn't return it. He nodded once. "All right," he said. "You're fine. We're open until everyone through here tonight is fine." The phrase sat on the counter and made its own shadow. He walked her back to the cab and glanced up at the sky. The waltz inside swung slow. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And then faded. He lifted his hand in a small gesture that wasn't quite a wave and wasn't quite a salute. "Windows up," he said, the way an older relative might remind someone to pack a sweater. "And don't look too long into the median if you see lights that don't have a source." She pulled off, eased the rig down the ramp and into the lane. The open sign hummed a little louder as she passed it at an angle that made it look less like a word and more like a shape. The scale house light shrank in her side mirror, became a square on a dark field, and then a pinprick. The first mile past the station felt normal in a way that made her shoulders loosen. She nestled back against the seat and found her rhythm. Eyes not fixed, moving in a practiced pattern. Mirrors, glass, mirrors, gauges, road. The road was a thread up on a loom, drawn taut, waiting for shuttle and pattern. Her tires sang in a key her body knew without listening for it. The night smelled different out here. Sage, a bony sweetness from creosote. Stone cooled by recent heat. Past 220, she rolled the windows all the way up. It felt ceremonial, a small ritual like checking a latch twice. The radio, which had been a grainy murmur of late-night callers and far music folded into static, caught something clean. A waltz, unashamedly old, tinny and elegant at once. The kind of music people once learned in gymnasiums under banners. The melody slid along the cab like a hand smoothing a sheet. The wind came in curious first, a touch at the edge of a curtain, a little tilt to the trailer, inquisitive, then more present. She held the wheel steady, light hands, elbows loose. The truck liked it when the driver relaxed. That kept the trailer from acting like a bell waiting to be struck. She took a long breath and watched the mile numbers walk toward her, and then under. 221. Lights hung low in the median, a pattern that suggested a vehicle with hazards on. She saw them from far enough away to make choices without rushing. A figure stood by the lights, hand lifted, waving in that open, universal way that says, "Can you help?" The posture was resolutely human. The presence was not threatening. This is how you are wired, she thought. You pull over and help people. Then she thought of the chalkboard and the moth and the barometer, and the small seal now set like a button at the corner of her trailer's mouth, and kept her speed steady. She moved one lane left, as courtesy demanded, and counted. 3, 2, 1, and she was abreast of the lights. The lights had no car. She saw that without staring straight at it. She saw it the way a person sees something unsettling at the periphery and learns to trust the periphery. The lights were simply there, illustrating hazard, not attached to a vehicle, unhurried in their rhythm, more metronome than warning. The figure was not next to the lights. The figure was where a figure would be, in the median scrim of brush, arm extended, shoulder hunched, a face turned toward the cab. He wore, but no, it was the shape of someone wearing something long, like a coat meant for rain. The wind stirred the brush around him and left him unruffled. She kept the cab's line generous, as if passing a cyclist on a narrow lane, and did not look fully in. The waltz kept playing, undisturbed by her pulse. A glint tugged at the corner of her eye. She checked the passenger side mirror, not because she wanted to, but because habit has more authority than curiosity. The trailer latch trembled. The padlock sat where it should sit, heavy. Beside it, the small lead seal quivered. A simple circle on a simple loop, digging its teeth into the idea of staying shut. It seemed to tug once against an invisible hand, and then settle as if a breath had been held and released. A gust climbed the side of the rig as if to see what was inside. The truck leaned and righted. Sand lifted from the shoulder in a sheet that looked like it should make sound but didn't. A whisper then, not inside the cab, but outside, riding the glass. It could have been the sound of sand hitting a window from a light angle. It could have been a voice saying a word she didn't quite catch. She did not roll the window down to find out. She kept the speed where it was. The needle on the speedometer stayed in its lane like a disciplined swimmer. At mile 222, a tow truck sat on the shoulder with its boom lifted a notch. It had a vintage look, a paint job that belonged in an old calendar. It wore a sign so clean, it had never seen Sunday. The driver's door was open a calm 3 inches. A yellow cone rested on the white line, as if someone had placed it there to think with. She put her signal on, gave it space, and saw, when she was halfway past, that there was no one in the cab, and no footprints in the dust drawn up by the wind. It should have felt theatrical. It felt like a room left midway through a task. Her phone had no service across this stretch, and that had never bothered her. Tonight it felt like the night had made a decision. The waltz on the radio leaned into a bridge. The bass note was a reassurance, steady as breathing. The road rose to a long, low crest. The stars vanished ahead where the sky turned a shade denser. On the other side, the land opened out, like something folded being unfolded, and the wind met her square. She felt it press, not a shove, exactly, but a persuasion. She let the professional part of her brain take over. Hands light, corrections tiny, eyes soft. She felt the trailer settle into her choices. The little seal vibrated twice and then thrummed at a frequency too slow to hear, only to feel like standing near a great cat when it purrs. At 223, a pair of flares burned bright and clean 30 yards into the median. They were new flares, the kind with ends that looked extruded and perfect. They stood upright without any cradles. The air around them did not shimmer with heat. They burned as if obeying a rule. She didn't glance in. She didn't need to prove to herself that they had no stems, no bass. The waltz reached a point of return and found its opening theme again, as if the song meant to say there was nothing new under any of this, only repetition done well. A metallic ping came from behind her, the precise sound of a washer declaring independence from where it had lived. Then another. Then stillness. She breathed. She pictured the brass hammer tapping the coupler and answering with that healthy tone that meant the thing wanted to stay a thing. She rode the slight grade down with her foot feathering the throttle and the truck agreeing like a good dance partner. At 224, the radio hissed once like a kettle, and the waltz faded into a weather report from a town 100 miles off. The wind lost its purpose, kept some of its speed. The world resumed overlapping common sense in the normal ways. She pulled into a truck turnout not long after that, a smooth, blessed shoulder advertised by a sign no bigger than a yard sale arrow. She set the brake, sat for a 40 count, and felt the edges of herself come back. The desert did its quiet work around her, grasses bending and unbending, a thin cry from a nightbird chalking the air. Only then did she step out with her flashlight and walk the rig with the same steady pace she used in sunlight. Her beam slid over rubber and steel, over straps and lights. Everything looked as it should until she reached the rear. The padlock was content. The lead seal bore a mark she hadn't noticed. Tiny cross-hatching where the stamp had bitten, and something else, a shallow dent along one edge. The sort that happens when small pressure is applied by something patient, and then rethought. She touched it with a fingertip. It was cool, then warm with her own heat. If there had been any idea of tampering, the idea had lost interest in a sudden, reasonable way. The wire held its small loop, like a thought completed. At the port of entry on the far side of the wind corridor, a trooper stepped out when she rolled slowly onto their scale. The building was modern glass, metal, lights that did not hum. The trooper wore a hat with a brim that could cut paper. He touched the visor in greeting and asked for her papers. She passed them up with the orange tag on top, because the instructions had been specific. The trooper read the tag, read her papers, looked at the trailer, then at the seal, and did not raise his eyebrows because some people in uniform learn to keep their eyebrows in one position, no matter what they see. "Ma'am, where did you pick up this clearance?" he asked, even though he did not sound sorry for asking. "At the station at the line," she said. "Open sign. Gentlemen inside." He checked the markers. Put the seal on. The trooper looked toward the long stretch behind her, as if he could see backwards through terrain. "Evening, staff?" he asked, voice softer. "I didn't ask names," she said. He considered the seal again. "You mind if I photograph that?" He took a picture with his phone, then a second with a camera that looked like it belonged to the state. He returned her papers carefully. "You're good to go. Window down now if you want. The corridor's behind you. Drive safe." Another officer leaned out of the doorway. He was older, hair cut close enough to be a shadow. "Did she have a tag?" he asked. The trooper nodded. "Color?" "Orange." The older man's face softened. He pulled the door open and stepped into the night, standing where the light made a careful square on the concrete. "Some nights," he said to no one, as if he was describing the weather, then directly to her. "If you see them again, tell them the roof on the East Bay clicks now in wind. They used to complain about that. Tell them, we fixed the gutter." She nodded because it seemed like the respectful thing. He made a small sound in his throat that could have been a laugh. "You think I'm peculiar," he said. And the way he said "you made it" include everyone. That station burned the year I came on. We keep the property mowed so nobody dumps a couch. Folks still stop to say they went through last night, got cleared, were told not to stop. We used to tell them they were thinking of the other station. Now we let it be. Seems to work. She drove into dawn that unfolded the way fabric unfolds when someone picks up one corner and walks backward. The light was almost physical in the cab, filling the edges of things, taking away those extra planes shadows invent at night. The orange tag sat on the seat beside her. It looked ordinary. She delivered her load to a warehouse that smelled like cardboard and forklift exhaust. The smell of 1,000 small shipments finding their way. The receiving clerk clipped the lead seal neatly and handed it back without comment, the metal cool in her palm. She almost asked him what he saw stamped there. She didn't. Later, on the return leg, she crossed the line in daylight because the dispatcher had shuffled runs and the day spread itself open like a promise. Where she had turned the night before, the station slept behind a low fence. A concrete pad, a collapsed length of chain, a sign with ghost letters where someone had sanded old words away. The open sign was not there. There was a blue box mounted on a pole that likely once held brochures. It was empty. She pulled into the gravel lot across the highway and parked by a diner that had the good grace to be simple and clean. Inside, behind the counter, a woman poured coffee and said, as if continuing a conversation, "You look like you could use a second cup." On a wall near the restroom hung a framed newspaper clipping with a photo of a man in an old patch, iron gray hair neat, shaking hands with a state official in a cap whose brim looked like a straight edge. The caption gave the man a name, and the dateline gave the article a year. It was a year that wasn't this one. The headline talked about service and safety and storms. "Was this the Waymaster?" she asked, sipping. "That him," the woman said. "Hail." He kept a chalkboard and listened to the wind like it talked sense. He could tell the weight of a truck by the sound it made over the seam in the first pad. Used to tell us not to hang wind chimes on the north side because they spooked the birds into the road. He had a way of telling you things sound like orders, but were really favors. The woman wiped a spot that wasn't dirty and then put the rag down. After the fire, folks said the building wasn't right and they knocked it down. But some nights people come in and say, "Thanks for the tag," or "Thanks for the warning not to honk," or "Thanks for the lead clip." And they look like people look when they have decided not to be embarrassed by what is helpful. She nodded. The cup was warm and heavy in her hand. Through the window, a section of the fence gave way to a view of the flat where the scale had been. Heat sketched a pale rope above it. A small bird rode the same pocket of air again and again, as if practicing a line. She drove out, and because she had room on the dash, and because the lead seal felt like a dot at the end of a sentence that matters, set it in the small tray where loose coins collect. It kept its emblem whether or not anyone looked at it. On nights when she came up on that stretch again, even at odd hours, she rolled the windows up at mile 220 as a courtesy to an instruction that had worked. Every so often, for a few minutes between radio chatter and road reports, a waltz would float up on a frequency no one admitted using anymore. It tilted the night into order, 3 steps at a time, simple as breathing. When she thought of the open sign later, she didn't think of it as an argument between old and new, or here and not here. She thought of it as a reminder that some jobs do not end just because a clock says so. Chalk and stamps and a careful ear can still make a corridor kinder. Scales measure what they measure. Some nights what's weighed is only the truck. Some nights it's the quiet insistence of a hand on a latch, the way a bolt wants to turn just because the wind told it to, the choice to keep the cab a closed vessel for a few miles, and let an old station's habits ride along until they see you past the bending lights in the median lights that want to tell a story into a stretch where stories become tape on, boxes and signatures in daylight ink instead. Story number 3. He preferred the mountain runs because the road made sense there. Lanes carved through rock and pine did what they said they would do. Climb, turn, hold you steady if you respected them. He liked the way the trucks hum braided with the trees, and how fog sometimes lay in bowls between ridges like milk poured into a dark dish. The night was honest in the high country. What you saw was what you saw, and what you didn't see, you learned to wait for. The route this week ran produce up from the coast to a valley that slept in frost most mornings. A cold front had crossed the passes that afternoon. By nightfall, the air had that glassine crispness that makes steel ring. He left the last town before the grade with a full thermos and a dashboard that looked like a tidy lit city gauges, glow strips, those little greens and ambers that tell you a machine is attentive. A sign warned of falling rock in a tone that suggested it had been warning for decades. Another sign made chain law sound like simple etiquette. Carry, prepare, consider. The GPS put a dutiful block over the screen at the first switchback, mapping nothing but the arc ahead and the patient arrow that represented him. Beyond the guardrail, black pines stood like an audience in perfect posture. He took the climb with the right gear and the right kind of attention, eyes moving in their rhythm mirrors, instruments, road, breath, road. Fog met him halfway up, not a wall so much as a presence. It stuck to the beams and made his own light look close and personal. Reflectors whispered their little galaxies from the edges. A pullout appeared. Loon's porch. A local joke scratched into the sign with a pocket knife. He eased over to check the straps on the produce pallets because habit matters more than superstition. The air smelled like sap and clean stone. Somewhere a creek kept its small conversation with gravity. Across the road stood a call box. It was the older kind, paint the color of fallen leaves, a door that used to lock with a simple push, a handset hung on a cradle with a springy cord. He hadn't seen one work in years. As he stepped down to walk the rig, the call box began to ring. It wasn't loud. The sound was contained, like the way wind chimes sound in a room with the door shut. He paused with one hand on a strap and counted the rings without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. Then it stopped. He told himself exactly what you would tell yourself. Frost can tighten metal and make noise. Wind nudges, rattles, plucks. Somewhere beneath that tidy reasoning, something in him asked if that call box ever had the sort of lines that carry electricity now. He tightened one strap a half turn. Everything else was right. He climbed back in, breathed on his hands, and let the radio find low music. The call box did not ring again. The fog thickened with the next curve, rolled up from a river's cut-like breath. He rolled the windows up, more for the illusion of safety than for any practical need. There is a stretch on that mountain where the state shaved a cut into the rock years ago, a deliberate bite that made space for a gentler angle. The walls on both sides are smooth and pale, and at night they throw back sound in a way that feels like an echo with opinions. When he entered the cut, the truck's own note came back to him a half-beat later, soft and agreeable. In the passenger mirror, something blinked once, twice, out of rhythm with his own markers. He glanced, not yanked, the way you do when something tries for your attention from the margins. The mirror showed what it always shows: trailer edge, reflective tape, a diagonal world in small. Then, beyond that, faint as a memory, 2 red points found shape and then lost it like fish under a surface. He leaned into the steer with the literal sense of that phrase. He listened to the tires. He listened to the engine. The red points appeared again, steadier now, and separated themselves as if a vehicle had eased out of his slipstream and chosen the next lane. A simple explanation came first. Someone's there. Another driver had matched him through the fog. Good. People often rest their eyes on the comfort of nearby lights. Then, the simple explanation tilted. The fog dulled visibility like something valuable, and where the road widened, nothing widened with it. Still, the red points kept their place. He saw, in the convex mirror, the line of reflectors on the trailer's side repeat themselves farther out, as if a second trailer followed his trajectory at an angle only a camera could see. He didn't slow. He didn't speed. He did what the mountain likes best. He respected the lane and the grade, and kept his hands quiet. If another driver had found him and was pacing him for company, that was a kindness. When a person lives by miles, companionship is often just this 2 pieces of light in the night agreeing without words to keep each other from being only. At the next long bend, where the rock gives way to a viewpoint fenced with a low rail and a sign that says "Take nothing but pictures," the red points climbed the curve ahead of him, not behind. He saw them through the fog as you see anything through that kind of weather indirectly, with patience. They took the arc surely, held their lane, signaled once as if to acknowledge the drop on the other side. He felt that strange cocktail of gratitude and unease that comes when simple rules fail to apply to simple things. If there was nothing in front of him and something was signaling, the thing was either not for him or specifically for him. The CB, which had been doing its late-night static blanket, gave a crisp click, like someone had depressed the talk button without speaking. Another click. Exactly the same. Then nothing. He had heard a lot of truck folklore in diners and yards. One story from this area came up every few winters, each time told with a handful of new details, and a handful of others left out. People called it the borrowed tale. This was the gist. In fog at Echo Notch, where the road intersects with a valley that catches and keeps weather, drivers sometimes fall into a short section, where their own lights bounce from rock and mist in such a way that they see themselves, not as reflection, not as mirror, but as a companion slightly ahead or slightly behind. The companion is never exactly where you would put it if you were staging a scene. It's always off by a stitch. The story's moral was never lessened as a warning. It was more like a practice. If the borrowed tale shows up, you keep steady, because it means the notch has chosen you for a careful crossing. He had never believed, and he had never disbelieved. He had left stories where they were useful, somewhere between the seat and the window. Riding along, the red points blinked twice and held. He read it as hazard and brought his speed down a dozen ticks that felt like folding a shirt rather than crumpling it. He rounded a shelf where the outer shoulder drops and the inner line presses against a slope. On that shelf, in the dead center of the lane, lay a boulder just large enough to ruin someone's week. It must have fallen from the inner wall within the last hour. Rock leaves a mark like chalk when it skids, and this one's dust still looked fresh. He had the room because he had given himself room. There was kindness in the fog tonight. It lifted just enough to show the shape, then settled again to let his mind move without jumping. He eased along the outside line and felt the trailer take the path, as if it had expected it. The red points ahead dimmed and brightened, like someone tapping a brake twice, appreciative. He breathed and laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because laughter sometimes says more economically than words, "Okay." The years teach small rituals. He tapped his running lights in return, the way drivers signal thanks after a clean pass. The gesture felt private and maybe foolish, but it also felt correct. The points winked once, then once again between breaths. The CB clicked softly, then laid down that flat ribbon of static that means no one is interested in words right now. At the summit, a straightaway ran like a string pulled tight. The fog changed character there, less like cloud, more like the new edge of a page. The taillights ahead took on a mirror's definition sharper, a little blue in their red, a little sideways, as if they were being seen through glass. He decided not to decide what they were. He let them be what they were. They kept him at a good pace. He felt the old restless part of his foot that always wants to drift up or drift down go quiet. Mile markers came and went like tidy trimming stitches. Where the summit begins to let go, the road crosses a viaduct that feels like a song held over a gap. The beams catch mist, and the drop below is the kind that persuades people into poetry. He had never liked it much in night weather. It had a way of suggesting more motion than there was. Tonight, as the deck opened beneath him, the red point slid out to center and held a straight line so compliant, it felt like a hand on a shoulder. His own arcs, reflected back from the rails, looked like deep-water fish. Halfway across, something tapped the passenger door, not from inside, not sharp. A sound like if a knuckle had touched glass almost politely, and then thought better of it. He didn't look. He didn't need to look. He knew every smudge and sticker on that panel. He listened, and heard only the truck doing its job extremely well. On the far side, under the shelter of a long overhang of evergreen, the red point slowed, signaled left, and seemed to take a turnout that was not yet there. He glanced to see if he had indeed come up on a turnout. The fog scumbled. The notch made its decisions about what he could see. A narrow paved apron emerged, and then receded like a piece of shoreline under tide. The points vanished with the kind of discretion that makes disappearance feel like a courtesy. He drove a mile more, 2, until the notch decided it had offered enough and the shoulder widened to a well-built turnout with a trash barrel chained to a post and a view the locals recommend in autumn. He pulled over because his hands told him to. He set the brake and let the engine idle down. Pine and cold earth breathed around the cab. He sat and watched the fog go about its business. The turnout had one more thing. A payphone bolted to a small post under a plexiglass hood so modest it looked like an apology for taking up space. The handset hung just a bit crooked. The line was cut clean, coiled once, and neatly zip-tied to the post in a gesture that had meaning only to someone who wanted things orderly. As he looked at it, the cell phone on his dash lit up without a tone, a lighting that looked like someone had brushed a fingertip across it. No service in the corner. No notifications. Then, for a second that could have been less than one, his phone displayed an incoming call banner with a number that didn't resemble a number so much as a label, Mile 80, one call box. The screen timed out. The truck's clock ticked to the next minute with its tiny digital confidence. Unbothered, he held still. The air around him felt warm by comparison with the fog outside. He thought of the earlier call box at Loon's porch, how it had rung its small bell under frost. He rolled the window down halfway and rested his arm there because the hand wants a job when the mind is not sure what to do next. Fog touched his skin, as if checking for a temperature. A single deer stepped out of the brush near the barrel and stood in the turnout, not skittish, eyes catching enough of his light to glow faintly. It looked toward the road the way a person looks at a door, not as if ready to enter, more as if considering the hinge. It flicked one ear and stepped back into cover. He raised the window. He checked the rig. The straps were snug, the seals intact, the tires content. By the time he was back in the seat, the night had shifted by some small degree. The fog climbed a foot and stayed there, a new ceiling. He pulled out and let the downgrade take him a little at a time. Near mile 81, the edge took on a reflective quality, as if the line paint had been renewed in the last hour. He saw the shadow of a shape struck against the mist, not a car, not a person. The red points ahead returned for the space of a breath, then went out the way embers go out when the wood decides it has given enough. He rolled down into the valley with the ease that comes when something has already decided to go right. The fog thinned. The smell of pines gave way to the flatter scent of fields' irrigation water. Soil turned and waiting. His body remembered morning, even if the sky wasn't sure yet. He took the first truck stop in the valley because that is where drivers meet their own theories and pass them around like salt. Inside, over coffee that understood its job, two drivers he recognized by face but not by handle were discussing the notch. The first said, "I had it last week." 3 clicks, then something in my mirror that behaved. The second said, "I saw it once like a promise. Braked me before a washout. Thought I dreamt it until I saw on the midday news some car had gone over down there. Not awful, just embarrassed," the anchor said. "Lucky." They fell into the shared silence people use when they are careful with the word lucky. He mentioned the borrowed tale by name, lightly, like a song people hum without owning a copy. They both nodded like he'd named a hometown. The older one, a woman with a streak of white hair that made every color in the room look warmer, said, "There's a crack in the rock up where the cut begins. Some night, if you're up there on foot, which you won't be, put your ear to it. The stone carries the sound of tires like memory. I think sound gets caught, and light. And sometimes the notch hands it back, when you're making a choice it wants you to make." She lifted her cup. "You don't have to call it anything more than that." He delivered at dawn. Forklifts sang their old industrial songs. The receiving clerk looked fresh like paper out of the ream. The pallets moved from one world to another, his world smelling of pine and thermos coffee, theirs of floor wax and shrink wrap. A man behind a high desk stamped his manifest with a practiced pat and slid him a small safety flyer about winter driving. Taped to the corner of the desk was a photograph, and because he had been thinking in photographs since the fog, he looked. It showed the viaduct in summer, green so thick it made the bridge look like a thread. In the foreground, a child had stuck a red bicycle reflector into a pile of gravel like a flag. Leaving town, he took the long way around to pass the maintenance yard. He didn't know why he wanted to. He liked seeing where the trucks that keep roads alive sleep. The gate was open. A man in a reflective vest was coaxing a stubborn hinge on a sander box. They waved the way highway people wave 2 fingers from the steering wheel, enough to be human. At the far end of the yard, propped against a building, stood a rack of old reflectors. Rounds and rectangles retired from rails. Their backs rusty, their faces shining their last. One round one, the size of a pocket mirror, caught his eye. It looked like the red points he had followed had a face. He parked outside the fence and took it in with his eyes like a souvenir you don't have to own to keep. That evening, after sleep, after another run written in grease pencil on the dispatch board, he checked the dash camera, mostly to confirm to the part of his brain that likes proof that it had been a normal night plus fog. The footage showed what it should: the curl of the mountain, the white of the line, the occasional bright blink of reflectors sending his own light back like a conversation. At the place where he had seen the rock in the lane, the camera caught something else, a faint warming in the pixels that corresponded with where the red points would have been if a second set of lights had slipped ahead. It wasn't crisp. Proof never is. It was enough to make him feel the way a person feels when their memory bows to their senses and says, "Fine. You were there. You know what you saw." 2 nights later, the fog returned, and the mountain did what it does, allowed and forbade in equal measure. The call box at Loon's porch did not ring. The loaned tail did not show. He made the climb and the drop with the regular set of small difficulties that make a driver feel useful. He found himself tapping his running lights once across the viaduct as a thank you to no one in particular. It felt like good manners. Near the summit, a new sign had been bolted into place. "Watch for fallen rocks." A clean bolt head winked in his beam. He pictured a maintenance crew working by day, setting it just so, laughing with each other in that quiet, tired way people laugh after they have wrestled heavy things into place. He took the curve where the boulder had been and found only a dry scuff where someone had pushed it aside. The scuff had the shape of a handprint, if a handprint could be made by absence. In the months that followed, he learned a way to listen to his own equipment for messages that were not about malfunction. Sometimes the trailer seemed to hum a note that meant easy. Sometimes the vibration through the wheel said, "Road seam ahead." Sometimes the CB made a small sound like a throat cleared when he was about to take a line he'd regret. He did not attribute any of that to ghosts. He attributed it to a familiarity so deep you could mistake it for magic. Still, on nights when fog lay down in the notch like a sleeping animal, he found himself looking for those 2 red points where the world narrows and sound returns in careful measure. If they came, he kept pace. If they did not, he kept pace anyway. And once, long after winter had turned, he saw the points again in a rain that behaved like a curtain being drawn slowly across a stage. They signaled once near the turnout with the barrel. He signaled back. The CB clicked once in what could have been acknowledgement, could have been nothing at all. It was enough either way. He never answered a call box. He never needed to. Whatever messages the notch sent were aimed at the part of him that already knew what to do. The mountain does not insist on belief. It insists on attention. The rest of it, the stories, the borrowed lights, the ring of an instrument with no wire, and the name of a mile on a screen with no service, those looked like the way a place keeps company with the people who pass through it in the dark, one rig at a time, red points holding tight to a line that leads out of fog and into morning fields, where produce becomes breakfast, and the night becomes memory. Story number 4. A long, level highway ran north across a quiet prairie, the kind of route where the land lay smooth and the sky seemed to be a second road above, stretching forever in pale ink. Darren took it at midnight, a refrigerated trailer humming behind him, and a thermos cooling slow beside the shifter. He had stopped earlier for fuel, and a new wiper blade, just in case weather wandered in. The forecast had promised clear air, and the glass before him held nothing but the faint smear of distant stars and the occasional glow of a far-off farmhouse. The cab felt like a small room with moving walls. Dashboard lights drowsed green. The vents sent out a steady curtain of warm air that smelled faintly of pine and coffee. The seat settled along with him, leather sighing. The world outside was steady, a black ribbon with white stitches. In mirrors, his trailer floated like a pale block of moonlight. The CB radio came alive around mile 47. No reason, and no one on the road but him and some local delivery box truck he'd passed 15 minutes earlier. A smooth wash of static rolled in across the speaker. It sounded like a tide without water. Then, faint at the edge of perception, a voice, not calling a handle, not barking with the usual rhythm of night drivers, just a shape of a voice, like a person standing in the doorway of a lit room. He nudged the volume, not wanting to chase it, just letting the sound come if it wanted. For a while, there was nothing but the soft waterfall of empty channel. Then it returned, clearer, and said his name. It came like a breath. Darren. He didn't scare exactly. He had felt the road's odd moods before. He turned the dial to check the channel, then back again. He didn't answer. He didn't reach for the mic. The voice returned, a little, steadier but still thin, as if traveling a long way. Mile 50, left lane for the bridge. Up ahead, the road ran straight. No sign of a bridge. He checked the atlas folded open on the passenger seat. A river cut the terrain a dozen miles on. He could see nothing yet but the pale gleam of reflectors marching out and the wide shoulders fading to grass. As he approached mile 50, a chill slid under his jacket, not cold, just the sensation of stepping into a room and forgetting why. The air looked the same. The pavement seemed unchanged, and yet he signaled and drifted left. No traffic. No reason not to. The lines tracked you like a metronome. A rise in the road. The low, dark idea of water to the right. There it was. A bridge he didn't remember passing on this route before. Short, old, with a guardrail that held a few scuffs. He crossed it without feeling a bump. The cab floated. The trailer settled. Something out in the grass to his right came awake, like a bird rattling a dry branch. He exhaled, chewed the inside of his cheek, and kept the wheel straight. The voice didn't come back for a while. The highway unwound itself, and the sky silvered in the distance where a small town slept around a water tower. He saw the water tower's red light blink its patience into the night. Mile 58 slid by, a sign, a reflector, a dark pasture, a memory of a creek. Darren drove in that peaceful way where thoughts fall off like leaves. At mile 63, the voice returned, softer than before, and it said, "Keep right." He kept right. Nothing materialized in the lane ahead. The emptiness stayed the same. Still, as the sign for the mile stood up out of the shoulder, he saw the texture of the asphalt change in the right lane, a darker seam. Something had been repaired and set smooth. The left lane showed a long, faint ripple that caught his high beams weirdly and let them go, like light over water. He left it alone. The CB spat a quick burst of static and quieted, as if relieved. Past mile 70, the land folded into low hills and restful woods. An exit sign proposed a rest area in 2 miles, and he thought he might stop to stretch and refill the thermos. The radio cooled down and leaned back into its hush. A nightbird cut a line across the highway and vanished. The road breathed. In the slight descent, out on the climb, he took the rest area. It was small, with a ring drive and a handful of angled slots designed for drivers to ease in and hush their machines. He backed into a spot near the end and let the trailer's brakes chirp. When the engine settled, he sat in the quiet a moment, the kind of silence that feels round and careful, touched by the soft whir of the fridge unit and the tick of a cooling manifold. He stepped out, and the night pressed close, not heavy, just thorough. The fluorescent lights over by the restroom building hummed with a tone like a faraway harmonica. Insects spun in a lazy galaxy around the fixtures. The soda machine made a steady heartbeat sound. A janitor in a blue jacket pushed a cart across the tile inside the building and nodded when Darren dipped a shoulder in greeting. There was a bulletin board with crisp printed notices about winter driving and construction delays. Someone had taped up a photo of a lost dog under it with a number to call. Back in the cab with fresh coffee, he checked the truck's clocks. The dash read 1:13. The phone screen, dozing, read 1:06. He didn't care which was right. On the road, time sometimes ran like a lazy brook. A trickle, a pool, a sudden rush. He rolled back onto the highway, gentle with his throttle, and felt the rig catch the groove. Out there, distance looked solid. He liked that. Solid things behaved themselves. The radio waited until the next stretch of total darkness before it spoke again. Mile 78, it said with careful patience. Slow it down. Semi stalled at the top. He didn't see any beacons ahead, no hazard flash. The thought of another driver stranded in that black hush made his chest feel tight for the other guy. Darren eased his speed. The trailer stayed polite behind him. He topped a rise at a cautious pace and saw at the crown a shape like a sleeping animal in the right lane. No flashers, no reflective tape, just a low, wrong shape, like a truck that had eaten its lights. He signaled left, took it slow, and gave the shape a wide berth. As he slid past, his headlights found a strip of shiny chrome, a bit of wheel, the kind of detail that lets the mind slot an object into place. It was a rig, or the remains of one, but arranged in a way that didn't fit a known pattern. He didn't look too long. The less you stare at strange things, the smaller they can stay in the mind. He cleared it and let the accelerator feel his foot again. Mile 82. You're okay, the voice said, almost warm now, and the speaker clicked and fell back to its seaside hush. He thought of reaching for the mic and asking who was running the check ahead. Maybe highway patrol using a relay? Maybe a convoy out there in the darkness? Someone who had seen the trouble first? He touched the mic and didn't pick it up. Silence held the shape of the cab in a gentle way. He felt that speaking would break some spell that was not necessarily bad. At mile 89, the sky looked a shade paler. He checked it, but the weather remained clear. The horizon had a pink thought to it, the idea of dawn, but he knew it was too early for that. The night had a while to go. He passed under a long billboard whose metal support hummed softly to itself. His lights made the rivets look like a constellation. Another voice came to life on the channel, not speaking to him, just the familiar patter of 2 drivers comparing road conditions farther upstate. They laughed about a diner whose pie had no business being that good at 3 in the morning. The ordinary sound felt like a blanket over his shoulders. Normal, human, plain. He listened, smiled without thinking, and counted signs. Deer crossing, county line, a tiny white placard that read, "Emergency U-turn only." Mile 92, the careful voice said, and he realized he had been waiting for it to come back. Scale house. Take the ramp. Stay left at the split. He frowned. The scale house on this route was closed overnight. He had passed it before, a squat building with a standard set of bays, a low roof, a line of red-barreled cones stacked inside like toys. The sign before it now read closed in proud amber, the kind of bright that speaks with authority. Even so, the voice spoke in that way of giving a friend the spare key to the back gate. He put on the blinker and took the ramp. The tires purred on the concrete. The facility lay ahead, wide and quiet, bathed in amber light that made everything seem like a photo someone had kept in a wallet for years. The ramp split. He stayed left. The lanes had a few rubber ducks, those cheerful little yellow bumps lined up to force a path. He rolled between them. "Keep going, keep going," the voice murmured, and he went past the scale bay, past the closed window, past the empty parking slots used for inspections during daylight. The far end of the lot opened toward a service road he hadn't noticed before, a narrow lane that cut through a shallow stand of trees to rejoin the highway after only a breath. A chain hung across it, but the chain had sag enough to drive under. He eased forward until the chain touched his bumper. Then the chain rose, gentle as a curtain. It didn't scrape, it didn't ring, it just lifted out of the way, held aloft by its own sense of right timing. He eased down the lane. It felt like driving through a held breath. Leaves stirred, though no wind was felt. The return to the highway felt like stepping through a bead curtain into an empty room. The shoulder glided under him like quiet water. He merged into the right lane with no fuss. After a minute, the radio sighed again, then delivered a final small instruction. "You won't see it, but you missed it. Keep steady until 104. Then you can rest." Something had been avoided then. Something he would never see. A moment closed and folded away while he looked elsewhere. He thought of how luck worked, and of how often he had been alive because a tiny change had tipped a scale. He didn't want to think about what had happened on the main lanes between the scale house and the service road. He just placed his faith in the little hum of the trailer and the steady numbers on the odometer marching forward. He stayed with the road. The voice did not return. CB chatter came and went like birds skimming a lake. When he passed mile 104, a rest area sign appeared like a hand lifted in greeting. He took it. The place was larger than the last, with spots enough to make a little village of sleeping trucks. He slid into a space and popped the brakes. The engine took a breath and quieted. Inside the cab, the silence felt full and alive, like a watchful cat. He poured what remained of the thermos into the cup, took a careful sip, and let his eyes roam the dash, as if looking for a new detail in a familiar painting. The radio sat there with its tiny light, innocent, patient. He reached for the mic and held it without keying up. He thought of saying thank you to the air. He thought of asking who had threaded him like a needle through the last hour. The words formed and faded in him like the images on a dark window when you look at your own reflection. In the restroom building's foyer, a TV hung from a bracket in the corner, showing a local station that rotated weather and headlines in a loop. As he washed his hands, he caught a whisper of a scroll. "Minor incident near mile 93, it said. No injuries reported. Quick diversion kept traffic flow. Authorities thank drivers for cooperation." No footage, no flashing lights. Just a line of text on a blue gradient. It felt like the news you get in a dream, the kind that doesn't stick to your clothes when you wake. Back in the truck, he set an alarm for a half hour and reclined the seat a notch. Not enough to truly sleep, just to rest in that in-between where breath slows and thoughts drift in like fog from a lake. He meant to listen to the radio, but the familiar hush became something like wind in trees, and he slipped into that gentle shallows of almost sleep. He woke to the chirp of the alarm. The sky outside the windshield had softened at the edges. Not dawn. Not yet. But the night had loosened its hold. He stretched, felt the old pops in his shoulders, and reached to start the engine. In the moment before he turned the key, the CB crackled and a voice came through so clearly it seemed to stand at the door. "Mile 50, left lane for the bridge." It was his voice. He knew it without question. Not the sound of how we hear ourselves recorded and marvel at the difference, but the shape, the gait of it, the way it rounded one syllable and clipped the next. A soft laugh in the breath at the end. He froze, hand hovering. The speaker whispered with a light static like rain on distant trees. Then the voice his came again, saying, "Mile 63, keep right." He sat there, eyes on the radio, the truck idling quietly, senses moving like animals testing the air. The idea came to him, slow and solid. A circle. A loop that had been fed with his own voice from a future that had happened already, and a past that had not yet finished arriving. The thought didn't frighten him. It felt almost like kindness, like handing a lantern back to the person behind you on a narrow stair. He pressed the mic button and found his breath. He didn't say his handle. He didn't call out anyone's name. He just spoke into the cloud of space that hangs inside every cab. "Mile 78, he said, and he heard his words flow into the speaker as if in another lane entirely. "Slow it down." Semi stalled at the top. He waited. He had the strangest sensation of looking down two roads at once. One was the one he had taken, the one where a service road parted the trees and a chain lifted itself like a polite gesture. The other was a cousin road, almost the same except for a small difference at mile 93. A difference like a stone in a shoe. He spoke again, and it was easy. 92, Scale House. Take the ramp. Stay left at the split. Someone out there might hear him, or he might be listening to himself. And this moment was a mirror pointed at a mirror. He felt no panic at the recursive thought. The road loves loops, anyway. Every interstate sign is the past promising the future in numbers. He finished the pattern he had been given, voice steady, calm, the tone he would have wanted to hear. "You won't see it," he said in a steady hush, "but you missed it. Keep steady until 104. Then you can rest." He let go of the mic. The radio made a soft noise like a door leaning on its hinges, then eased back into its quiet. Outside, a bird made a single, tentative note in the trees near the rest area's picnic tables. He started the engine and the rig woke with a contented rumble. Back on the road, he felt different, not lighter or heavier, just in better-fitting shoes. The highway accepted him the way it always had. Small movements, big distances, a story told with numbers on signs. He passed the mile markers with a kind of fondness he hadn't felt in years, the way you feel toward a clock that has kept perfect time for you without ever asking to be noticed. Once, at mile 110, the radio sighed again and gave him a gift he hadn't expected. A voice came through, anonymous and tired and relieved. It said, "Thanks, friend. Whoever you are." He did not answer. He didn't need to. He smiled at the windshield, where the faintest suggestion of dawn now painted a thread of pearl along the bottom of the sky. For the rest of his run north, nothing strange happened at all. The road leveled. A town woke somewhere, and its bakery turned on its ovens. The air felt lighter. He crossed into a new county. A deer watched him pass from the tree line and did not step forward. A water tower wore its red light like a single bright thought. He turned the radio down, just a notch, and let the night lean away behind him like a curtain being drawn, slow and soft. There is a kindness that lives out there, where miles fold and unfold with no one watching. It wears odd shapes. A voice on a channel you didn't call. A chain that rises for you, as if it knows your name. A sigh that threads you through the dark like a needle through cloth. Darren didn't look for it after that night, but he noticed that when he needed to change lanes, space seemed to open. And when he wondered about taking an exit or staying on, the wind made a choice feel like a settled fact. He still drove that same route sometimes. He kept the CB on, low, respectful. Every once in a while, he would hear his name in static and smile without touching the mic. The road remembered him. The road remembers everyone, perhaps. It is not a hungry thing. It is not a cruel thing. It is an old, patient thing that carries voices farther than they think they can go and brings them back again in time to help. And if, someday, he comes to that scale house again at night and finds the chain not rising, he will not be annoyed or spooked. He will think, "The lane is closed because the lane does not need me." He will take the main road, and the miles will keep counting, and the lines will keep ticking by like a good clock, and the radio will murmur a story to some other cab in the world, one voice reaching another across the dark, the way headlights glance off signs, and keep going, always going, without ever running out. Story number 5. The road along the coast looked like a thin line drawn by hand, steady and pale against the dark marsh. It carried a quiet convoy of sounds, the low hush of tires, the wet breath of salt air pushing over cordgrass, and the steady hum of an engine that had been faithful for years. Iris kept both hands light on the wheel. She liked the way this stretch felt, skirting the sea with only a guardrail, and a few feet of shoulder between her and miles of water that shrugged and shifted under the moon. Her load was simple tonight, lumber strapped neat and quiet on a flatbed, the straps drumming a soft rhythm when the wind curled just right. When she touched a gloved hand to one, the vibration came through her skin like the purr of a cat. The dash threw a gentle green glow that left the cab calm and dim. Somewhere beyond the marsh, trawlers sat in their slips under halyards that tapped mast to mast, a little metronome for the sleeping town. She kept the radio low. On nights like this, the highway felt like a piece of paper being drawn on by the truck itself, and the music only needed to whisper. Signs slid by at sensible intervals. Reflectors blinked and vanished, the way a firefly will do. She noted the patterns she always noted: water low, tide falling, air damp but not heavy, a faint line of cloud lying flat ahead the way a blanket lies over knees. She had fuel, she had hours, and she had a quiet sense that nothing would be asked of her tonight but patience. Past the long causeway, there was supposed to be a short series of lane shifts for bridge work. She'd read the company email. Temporary cones, flaggers. Follow the pilot car if one was there. It would be routine and slow. She didn't mind that. She welcomed the chance to press a palm into the wheel and let the math of distance and time soften around the edges. The first sign felt ordinary. Road work ahead. A second, left lane closed. The kind of amber-lit letters that stand out in night, like words on a chalkboard. A trailer-mounted arrow blinked with the authority of a librarian tapping a finger to her lips. Iris signaled and slid right. Far ahead, a cluster of temporary lights washed a piece of the road in warm honey. She saw a portable generator idling on its own, cords snaking from its side, and disappearing into the darkness where a row of cones began. She slowed, watched her mirrors, saw no one gaining from behind. The cones lined up as if they'd rehearsed. They weren't crisp and new. They had scuffs and faint smears where other nights had brushed them. She eased along the pattern they made, a gentle curve around what the sign said was a work zone. No crew stood visible. That wasn't unusual at deep night jobs, especially if they'd shut down for a break. An automated flagging device sat on its tripod with a bright stop displayed and a little red light that didn't blink, didn't fail, just insisted with polite clarity. She brought the speed down to a crawl and stopped. The truck sighed the way a tall person does before sitting. Iris waited. The marsh made its small sounds. The generator thudded, steady as a heartbeat. The red of the sign felt like a warm coin in a cold palm. She watched for any movement at the edge of the light. A shadow, of a hard hat, a gloved hand lifted. Anything. Nothing moved. The sign didn't rotate. She looked at the device again. Some models had sensors, but they usually worked in pairs. When one side allowed traffic, the other side held. Eventually, the cycle would change. She waited long enough for a long advertisement to play through on the radio. Then another. Still nothing. Iris looked left and right, out across the marsh. There was a wind moving out there, low to the ground, ruffling grass but never making it to the height of her window. The highway sat on its own little island, held up by causeway pilings and a faith in engineering. The sense was not that she was alone, but that the rest of the world had decided to be quiet. After 5 full minutes, she flicked her headlights to low, then high again in a courteous question. The sign didn't adjust. She eased the wheel right and let the truck creep to present its nose further into the empty lane. No horn sounded. No human cry. The device data logged to itself. Patient. She thought of the email. Temporary closures. Pilot car where indicated. No mention of intermittent full stops. She considered the science of it. On a night job, the crew might be clearing the far lane first, keeping this side still until they were clear. She touched the dash twice like a little ritual of patience and waited 2 more minutes. Then she set the brake, flipped on her hazards, and climbed down to stretch the stiffness out of her legs. The night smelled like low tide, clean and faintly metallic, with a hint of creosote from old pilings. The cones stood at attention, sleeves reflecting amber and white. The automated flagger's skin of paint looked new. Someone had cared for it. Iris walked along the nearest cones, letting her boots sound out the texture of the shoulder. Crunch, hum, crunch. As she passed the 3rd cone, a small, loose strip of reflective tape fluttered once and settled. She carried chalk sticks in her door pocket for crude measurements on lumber. She took one out now and drew a small X near the base of the cone, low where only someone standing close would notice. She returned to the cab. She watched. The sign remained stop, the red light unblinking, the generator faithful in its thudding. Behind her, the long causeway held a chain of empty. No headlights crested the slight rise. The marsh didn't offer birdsong. They had agreed with the night to sleep. She eased back out of her spot and crept forward, spooning the truck between the cones with the care of someone threading a needle. The stop glowed. She felt odd moving past it, even at this slow speed, as if stepping into a room after knocking and hearing no answer. But it was a machine. She went 5 feet, then 10, watching both edges. If anyone appeared, she could halt in a breath. Then, as the truck's bumper drew level with the tripod, the round face of the sign flinched, like a startled person deciding to smile, and rotated to slow. A small amber light blinked twice. Iris let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding, let the truck shift gently into motion, and proceeded, grateful and careful, along the temporary lane. The cones guided her like a quiet host with a candle. The road surface changed to a patched texture, then back to smooth. A portable light tower painted the world in soft gold. A stack of new guardrail lay on its side beyond the margin, banded and still. Then, as if drawn by someone who had run out of chalk, the lane pinched again, and another automated flagger presented its stern red face. She stopped again. This one stood alone at the beginning of a new single-lane section. No crew. No pilot car. No other sign. Her mirror caught the glare of her own hazard lights blinking off the reflective parts of her trailer. The sound of the generator here was deeper, an older engine maybe, each beat a little softer at the edges, as if it would prefer to sleep. She waited. The face did not change. After a time equal to the time before, after the radio ad for a hardware store in a town she had never visited cycled through exactly, she tried the same courtesy flash of beams. Still no turn. She set the brake again, chalked the base of the nearest cone with another small X, and sat very still in the seat, as if motion in the cab might influence something that should be left undisturbed. Then she turned the engine off. The sudden quiet landed around her like snowfall, thick, soft, a little unreal. Without the engine's hum, the other sounds grew larger in the space. The generator's beat became the room's clock. The marsh sighed in long vowels. The fluorescent tubes on the light tower whispered a tone that she could feel more in her teeth than in her ears. Tiny things sand in the wind. A quiet tap in the wiring of her dash came forward, the way animals will step closer when the barn doors are closed, and voices hushed. In that quiet, something changed. Not the sign at first, not the cones. The air itself seemed to lean forward, as if listening. A very faint scratch came from the shoulder, like a glove dragging over textured plastic. She looked at the cones. She did not see one move. She did not see any tilt. But the pattern they made shifted a fraction, the curve they formed easing an inch to the right, then an inch more, until a narrow corridor widened between them and the guardrail, enough for a careful truck to pass. The red stop rotated, patient and smooth, to slow. The amber blinked. Iris turned the key. The engine returned with a grateful sound. She slipped the truck forward and let the cone's new language guide her. The space was tight. She could see her chalk mark on the base of one cone as she crept by her X, exactly as she had made it. She paused to check her mirrors, to make sure the trailer did not kiss the rail, and she felt as if someone were matching her small motions with their own in the dark, not hindering, not helping, only keeping her company until the truck cleared the pinch. And then she was through. The temporary lights fell behind. The marsh widened. The road resumed its standard width and texture. A green sign for a scenic pull-off swung gently as a breeze found it and let it go. Iris turned the radio up a notch without meaning to, just enough to put a human voice in the cab. A late-night DJ murmured about the history of a lighthouse that no longer needed to warn anyone. The calm returned so thoroughly that the previous few minutes felt like a dream she had remembered while awake, the precise shape of it already starting to fog at the edges. Then she saw it. Another amber message board, another lane shift, another set of cones. It was subtle at first. The board stood at a slightly different angle. The light tower hummed at a slightly higher pitch, but when she drew closer, she saw the automated flagger and felt her chest tighten with the recognition of a familiar doorway in a maze. The same red face, the same steady light, the same absence of human silhouette. She looked at the base of the nearest cone. There, low on the sleeve, was a small chalk X. She slowed until motion could barely be felt. She lifted a hand, let it fall. She felt no anger, only a kind of curiosity, the way a person feels when a trick of the light makes a room look unfamiliar. She stopped exactly where she had stopped before. She did the same things. Headlight courtesy, hand on the wheel, breath out. She waited for the sign to flinch. It did not. She turned off the engine a second time and listened to the knowledge that the night had of her. The scratch of reflective plastic on gravel, very faint. The cones breathed into a different posture, a tiny opening assembling itself at the edge like lips learning a word. The sign turned to slow. She passed with care. Her own chalk X met her eye at the same place in the pattern. The second loop felt like a spool of ribbon unwinding, neat and inevitable. At the third repetition, a little laugh escaped her. Not mocking, not brave, just a puff of air that acknowledged the oddness. Time had made a small circle out here and set it in the road. She thought about calling someone. Cell service out on the marsh came in thin and tinny. The roadside assistance number for the Department of Transportation would send her to a menu. She imagined trying to explain to a voice at a desk that the cones seemed to be practicing a puzzle with her. She did not want to give it the wrong name and make it smaller than it was. She opted for patience instead. The one thing she had brought enough of, the fourth loop, she tried something else. When the sign did not turn, she did not honk or flash or move. She lifted her phone and took a picture of the arrangement in front of her. Then she rolled down the window and set her thermos carefully on the guardrail, in that pocket where road and rail meet, and small things can wait without harm. She watched the stainless steel hold the night, the way it takes on a color that isn't exactly silver. She shut off the engine. The cone edge corridor appeared again. The sign performed its small ritual. She pulled through, feeling the trailer follow as if it were listening too. She drove the couple of 100 yards of clear, and there, again, the next set stood ready. She checked for the thermos out her right window. If she had been looped, it would be there again. If the road were longer than it should be, it would not. It was not there. The guardrail held a little smear of condensation where it had sat, but the thermos itself was gone. The absence felt like a nod. This was not a precise circle then. It was a series of rooms that looked alike, each with one small difference, like a hotel where each door opens to a copy of the last, but with the bed turned an inch. She made her way through the next pair of flaggers with the same ritual. Stop, off, wait, go. With each pass, the wind changed slightly. She heard a distant gull once, where before there had been only the marsh's hush. On one repetition, a solitary boatlight moved along a far channel, a slow star sliding low and sure. On another, a green sign farther on swayed in the opposite direction. Small changes. After a while, the radio station shifted under her fingers. The DJ had finished his lighthouse story. A live traffic update slipped in. Intermittent closures along the coastal bridge project tonight, the voice said. Expect delays. Crews are cycling one lane at a time. A minute after that, she saw something so ordinary it made her laugh quietly again. A pilot car. It sat where the last automated flagger would have been. A pickup with an amber bar on top and "Follow Me" printed on the tailgate in proud letters. No one stood beside it. The flashers pulsed a gentle rhythm. Iris rolled to a stop and looked for a driver. No one came out of the cab. She waited 3 beats, then 5. The truck's brake lights flicked on without her seeing anyone move inside. It pulled forward slow as a tide. She followed. The pilot car kept a motherly pace. When the lane grew tight, its tailgate came a little closer with a confidence that said it had measured exactly the space between guardrail and trailer, and found it sufficient. They moved through a section where the cones stood strangely far apart, like people giving one another room. They passed a tower of spare bases stacked like checkers. They passed a roll of caution tape no one had stretched yet. The pilot car reached clear pavement and went a good 2 truck lengths farther than Iris expected, before pulling to the shoulder. Its flashers went still. The engine quieted. The cab did not open. Iris rolled past and looked. No one sat behind the wheel. The interior held the tidy shapes of a jacket on a hook, a coffee cup in a holder, a clipboard on the seat. It looked as if the driver had just stepped away a moment and would be back, shoes tapping gravel, saying, "Okay, you're good." On the other side of that section, the road was its old self. The causeway's rhythm returned under the tires. Iris reset the cruise and felt the world resume its regular breathing. The picture on the windshield lost its amber glaze and became a clear, clean night above the water. A few miles on, an actual work crew materialized, bright vests glowing, a foreman leaning over a set of plans spread on the hood of a truck. A flagger there lifted a hand in thanks as Iris moved through on their open cycle. She lowered her window and let the night speak between two people a moment. "Been smooth tonight?" the flagger called, tone conversational, like a friend asking about the weather. "Full of surprises," Iris said with a small smile, not unkind. "You had an automated set back there." "Yeah," the flagger said, and shook his head like someone thinking about an appliance that had behaved strange. "They cycled weird after midnight. We shut them down for a bit. Should be all right now. Sorry for the wait." "No trouble," she said, and meant it. She lifted a few fingers off the wheel in that small salute drivers, share, and rolled on. At the next pull-off with a view of open water, she eased out of the stream and parked for a minute. The night made room around her. She checked her straps, the way one straightens the blankets before sleep. When she came back around the front of the truck, she noticed a small foreign smear low on the bumper. White paint with a black scuff, the kind of mark that comes off a cone's reflective sleeve if you brush it just so. She ran a thumb across it and felt it give. She could have cleaned it, but she didn't. She left it there a while, a small, quiet proof that the night had put its hand on her and let go. When she climbed back into the cab, she reached for the empty spot where her thermos should have been on the passenger seat, and found, with a small, surprised sound, that it was there after all. Not exactly where she'd left it on the rail, and a little cooler than it should have been, but balanced neatly as if someone had set it down with care. She picked it up, unscrewed the lid, and poured the last inch into her cup. It tasted like stainless steel and black coffee and the way a calm night feels under a sky with no clouds. She drank it and smiled at her own reflection in the side window, a shadow overlaid with the lights of the pull-off. When she pulled back onto the highway, the miles came simply. No more automated flaggers, no more moving cones. A bridge appeared, bright and clean where new rail gleamed. The sea looked like black glass. The truck and its long load sat steady on their path like a stitch holding two pieces of fabric together. Out there are machines that make decisions when people are not present. They are small decisions. Pause here, proceed there. They are made with timers and sensors and patience. Sometimes the night lends them a kind of attention that feels human, as if anything that stands watch long enough learns to care. Iris did not try to name it. She drove, thankful for the slow parts and the still parts, and the parts where someone she did not see made room for her to pass. Story number 6. Across the high mesa, the night felt wide and bone dry. Malik steered a northbound tractor with an almost empty dry van trailer that sounded like a drum if your knuckles rapped it, paper towels and plastic wrap light freight. The engine hardly broke a sweat, and the rig did that floating thing long haulers love. Steady, even, like water poured from a pitcher. At these hours, the desert held to small, loyal noises. The brush of crosswind over the mirror arms, the constant seethe of tires, the faint rattle in an overhead compartment he meant to fix and never did. His radio carried a low-spoken station out of a town behind him that talked about tomorrow's sunrise and which days would be good for fishing. The moon was high enough to make the land into a page with penciled marks, the yucca, the fence line, the old telephone poles that still stood where wire no longer ran. First oddness came from light, not from sound. A closed truck wash squatted off the right shoulder, its floodlights still on for no one, painting an acre of bare ground and rounded boulders. As Malik came up the grade, his headlamps added their bright to the scene and cast his rig's silhouette across that lit dirt. He watched the shadow because drivers watch everything. It was a good shape, a square-shouldered cab, a long trailer, the whole of it inked onto the earth like the cutout in a storyteller's hand. Then the shadow did something a shade too early. It eased left before he did. Not much. A hint, a suggestion, the way a person will lean an instant before stepping. Malik glanced at his hands on the wheel, felt the alignment true and the tires steady, and held his line. The shadow slipped another inch left. Half a heartbeat later, he saw the ladder. It lay in the road at the far edge of his lane where the wash's light faded back into night, a metal extension ladder folded in like an arm, likely lost off a contractor's rig. Too late for a dramatic dodge, but early enough for a calm correction. He nudged left, gave the thing a couple of feet, felt the trailer follow clean and unbothered, and slid past. In the mirror, he watched the ladder pass through his taillight glow. and disappear behind. His pulse did the small kick such moments bring, then settled. He checked the wash's splash of light and remembered the lean of the shadow. Maybe angles. Maybe the floodlight had bitten his shape from a track that wasn't his. He told himself that. He could live inside that explanation. He pushed on. Out past the wash, the night went spare again. The road fell into long, serene sections where nothing seemed to happen except progress. He liked those. The moon slipped behind a pale lip of cloud. The land took on the color of an old photograph. A billboard rose, its advertisement peeled, but its anchor light still bathed the shoulder in a slow pulse like a sleeping heart. His shadow stretched along the highway embankment and lay there neat as a ruler. At the next set of yard lights and equipment rental near a junction, the silhouette came alive again. He felt it. The shadow checked its speed an instant before his foot moved, nose dipping in the black outline on the right-of-way. He breathed out, slowed, and the truck settled a hair earlier than his mind had planned to ask for. He didn't need the extra caution to make the curve, but the curve felt as if it had appreciated the courtesy. He drove on with the strange idea that the side of his rig imprinted on the night had become a partner. It wasn't an ordinary idea. He didn't care for folklore and had no appetite for scaring himself. Still, he couldn't deny small, repeatable things. Under man-made light, the silhouette anticipated him by a breath. Under the moon, it minded him like a well-trained dog, following precisely. He filed it away as one more detail to keep track of, like wind direction or how a truck ahead carried itself. A sign warned of grades and switchbacks. The highway pinched to 2 lanes, then one each way. Trucks downshifted low here in winter. Tonight the air was mild and dry, and Malik had room and visibility until the road dove into a shallow canyon where the rock stood nearer and the world narrowed to the reach of his beams. Headlights paint in thick strokes in places like that. The walls caught his brightness and made a moving picture out of it. He saw his rig's profile thrown tall onto the sandstone, that familiar square shape leaning and straightening as the curve asked. The silhouette looked honest, like a measurement. He liked the way it explained the angle better than the sign had. Half a mile in, at a blind right bend, the picture stopped agreeing. His lights laid his outline on the wall, and the wall shadow slowed sooner than the truck did, then came to a near stop, not a jitter or flicker, but a clear hold, as if the cutout had reached something before he had. He touched the brake. Nothing leapt out at him. The movement of the shadow was so at odds with the motion his body felt that for a second he wondered if the grade under his wheels had changed. He braked a little more. The trailer softened in the line like a big animal easing its weight onto a front foot. He brought the whole rig to a smooth stop just shy of the deepest part of the bend. He killed his high beams to keep from blinding anyone. The low beams made the canyon a hush of gray. The air moved like someone opening a door in another room. What slid around the curve was not dramatic, not tragic, and not what anyone would prefer to meet at speed. A small herd of cattle, dark shapes with quiet heads, wandered into his lane, unhurried, their hooves clicking polite notes on the road surface. They filled the space snout to tail. There were no horns to flash in his light, no wild eyes. Just the deliberate drift of animals that belonged to someone, and to the land more than to the road's hurry. Malik sat very still and did not touch the horn. The animals lifted ears, considered him, and kept moving. He watched their shadows go before them along the rock like painted figures in an old cinema. The last tail cleared. He waited for a count after that to be sure. Then he rolled forward, slow, respectful, feeling the long wheelbase round the bend with his breath held. The truck cleared. He didn't speak. He felt that whatever had helped him know to stop didn't want thanks said out loud. At the next turnout, he eased in and set the brake. He stepped down and stood in the cool air. The canyon made its own sound faint, like a shell. He walked around the rig with his flashlight just to give his body something practical to do. Tires took their light like coins. The rims gleamed. Under the trailer, where headlights never reach, the space had that night-black quality that seems soft. He played the beam along the canyon wall, where a moment before a 2-story slice of his truck had stood. Now there was only rock. The light caught nothing odd. He told himself again about angles, about how beams play tricks. He had enough healthy suspicion to believe that the world often answers with physics when asked a good question. Back in the cab, he let the engine idle, until the temperature needle sat where it liked. He put the rig in gear and eased out, not trying to catch up time he didn't need to catch. After the canyon, the road leveled onto a basin where the night sprawled comfortable and starry. He fell into cruise again. On a gentle rise, a maintenance yard slept off to the right, bright with tall poles that turned the ground butter yellow. The chain-link fence wore reflective tags that chimed in long rows as his beams kissed them. His silhouette reached across the yellow and made that neat picture again. He couldn't help but look. It felt like glancing at a clock to confirm your sense of time. The shadow lifted its nose minutely. He realized his hand had begun to do the same on the wheel, a tiny correction for a gust he hadn't consciously recognized. He smiled at the air. The partnership felt practical now, not uncanny. He would take practical. The second strangeness that night had nothing to do with animals, and everything to do with inanimate common things that behave differently at night. Gravel, for instance, and fresh paint. Past mile 211, a sign announced, "Road, marking ahead." The paint crew must have wrapped hours ago. The lines looked bright and correct, yet under one overpass, bright as day with its own lamps, the fresh white had made a glare that hid a faint offset. The lane wandered a hand's width left where new paint had been laid beside old, like the road had considered trying out a different path for itself. Malik's eye caught the odd seams an instant late. His silhouette on the concrete wall shifted first, the projected tires tracking the truer thread even as his own hesitated toward the wrong one. He adjusted, gave the truck that hand's width, and felt the tires choose the honest groove. No drama, just a puzzle smoothed. The miles after that felt held, not by fear but by attention. He let the shadow be what it was, a kind of echo with a mind to be useful. It never acted in darkness without a wall or a pool of light to show it. It never jumped. It never sought to startle. It anticipated by that same half-breath, enough to let a human ease into a better line. Around 3 in the morning, the high desert grew a thin, stubborn fog, not the grand, rolling kind. This was the low, ankle-high stuff, a pale veil that sank into dips and lay there, turning cattle guards to faint stripes and swallowing the bottoms of signs. Malik tucked himself into the right lane and let the speed drop another whisper. The fog took the beam of his low lights and drew little halos around the reflectors on the guardrail. The world became small. At the edge of the fog, the silhouettes grew crisp again. He saw his truck painted on a bare hillside by a security light at a shuttered gas station. The outline's trailer looked wrong for a blink shorter. He squinted, then understood. The shadow had cut itself off at a mound of gravel, as if something had closed partway behind him. He laughed at himself once. Just a breath. He was awake enough. He trusted that. The last strangeness came near a bridge that crossed a slot in the earth, so clean it looked carved. The county had placed new lights at the approaches, bright and sharp. One amber arrow flashed for an upcoming merge where crews had staged equipment on the shoulder. The left lane ended sooner than it had last season. He could see the zipper of barrels. He merged well ahead of it. Other headlights were far behind. He had the bridge to himself. As he committed to the crossing, the wind shifted a cross-breath that took the trailer steady but firm, and in that shove of air, the truck's shadow against the far wall of the cut came to a full newspaper-clear stop and held up a hand he could not see except as stillness. He stopped, not hard, not in a panic. He set his foot and made the mass listen to the ask. The truck came obediently down from motion to rest, tractor straight, trailer true. In the silence that lands on a stopped rig like a feather, he heard a loose strap on some unattended pallet whisper over itself once ahead. His low beams showed nothing yet but the zipper line and the ahead dark. Then the fog breathed forward out of the cut, a low scarf rolling a few inches higher than before, and in that scarf a pale shape drifted into view. It was not a vehicle. It was not a person. It was a boat, an aluminum fishing boat, upside down, likely blown off someone's yard or trailer in a storm, its dull belly scuffing the asphalt as the wind loaded the bridge and moved it like a toy. It scraped across the very lane he had been committed to and lodged against the barrels where the merge pinched. One more little gust, and it might have teetered against the low rail. He watched it finish crossing and go still. He thumbed his hazards on, rolled the rig forward slow, and gave the odd visitor a wide berth, the way one gives a stray dog space so it can choose what to do without fear. Past it, he let out a laugh that only he heard, not at the impossible, just at the odds. The shadow on the far wall moved again, as his lights told it to. It had changed its mind about stopping the instant the road had opened, as if making the same judgment he had made. Okay now. At the other side of the bridge, he pulled into a turnout that faced an empty lot and looked into the cab's side window at his own reflection, layered over the night. A second reflection hovered a hair off from the first, not spooky, just the result of dual panes. For a breath, he had the oddest thought that the reflections in the shadow were all pieces of the same quiet helper. The way a road shoulder, a mirror, and a white line all belonged to the same, larger idea of staying true. Dawn took the sky a shade lighter there. Birds worked the brush with small sounds. Malik stretched his fingers, rolled his neck, and drove on into a morning as ordinary as any. Ahead, the desert waited with its long distances and practical sky. Behind, a night had given him a picture that had acted out of step just enough to ask him to notice. He would not tell it as a marvel. He would carry it the way drivers carry the feel for a sweet spot in the throttle, or the timing of a downshift, the sense that something alongside had taught him a cleaner line. He kept an eye on his mirrors, not because he expected a repeat, but because that is what a person does after anything uncanny. Check twice, steer smooth, and let the road, which is older than worry, unfold. Story number 7. The mountains held the night like cupped hands, and the road braided up into the dark where spruce and fir leaned over the shoulder like listeners. Elena took the grade with patience, a steady hum under her palms, and a trailer that rode full enough to keep her planted. Snow wasn't in the forecast until dawn, but the sky had decided differently. It had grown a soft, muffled weight, the kind that turns a sound into a rounded thing and trims the edges off light. Her cab glowed a gentle amber from the dash. The heaters breathed out warmth that smelled faintly of wet wool and coffee. The wipers swept with the slow, important rhythm of a clock, clearing and clearing again a view that reduced itself with each minute. The white lines went from confident to tentative, then hid themselves entirely under a dusting that thickened into a thin, honest cover. The first sign had come 10 minutes ago. Chain area, 2 miles. The next added a polite insistence. Chains required when lights flash. The lights flashed. Elena eased off into the turnout, a blunt, wide crescent set into the hillside. Sodium lamps painted the plowed banks in a warm haze. A handful of other rigs sat there, hulking and patient, their hazard lights breathing orange into the falling snow. She pulled in near the end and set the brake. The engine's idle became the room's hush. When she stepped out, the night took a friendly step closer, snow tapping her jacket in soft, individual notes. Her boots found grit under the fresh powder. Chain work in this weather isn't drama. It's a small string of practiced gestures. Elena set the bundles down, felt the links through her gloves, made sure the inside was inside, rolled the truck a hand's width when needed, and clipped, cinched, checked. A pair of drivers 2 spots down laughed about something quietly and went on with their work. The world was focused and mild at once. By the time she stowed the last bungee, the flakes had fattened into the kind that capture light and show their whole bodies as they fall. The mountains had lost their edges entirely and become a gentle, grand shape, like the back of an animal sleeping under a sheet. She climbed back into the cab and let the heaters chase away the cold that had made a home in her sleeves. The wipers pushed 2 clean crescents into the white. Not a mile beyond, the snow deepened to that honest, soft layer that makes sound change. Highway noise grew more felt than heard. The world became small. Reflective stakes stood on the shoulder in neat rows, breathing their tiny blue and white reflections back at her. The black spruce looked like cutouts, their lower branches holding shelves of white. Up ahead, past a bend that felt older than the road itself, a soft orange flicker found the snowflakes and lit them from within. A plow came around the corner. It wasn't a surprise to see one. Up here they moved like midnight custodians, making long, quiet passes, blade down, light cycling, doing their work with dignity. This one eased to the shoulder just ahead of her turnout, as if to wait. Its cab windows shone with interior light, warm, a domestic glow. The bar on its back had a message board, and as she rolled forward, the amber letters woke a line at a time. Follow plow. Do not pass. Elena let space open between them, a respectable, safe cushion measured not with fear but with respect for stopping distance. The plow eased out, blade angling so the snow curled off into the bank like the wake of a slow boat. She fell in behind, following the thin tunnel of visibility the plow created. Tire tracks were more suggestion than proof, but the plow's path was clean. The message board lit again. Single lane ahead. They climbed into weather. It wasn't a raging storm. It was a steady, determined fall that taught the eye to recalibrate what close meant. At times, her world was held entirely within the reach of the headlights' warm fans. Beyond them, the snow was a soft, shifting wall. Trees appeared as silhouettes for a breath, and disappeared. When she glanced toward the plow's cab, she saw nothing but the reflection of her own light in the plow's mirrors. The interior glow made the windows milk white. She could not see a hat, a shoulder, a shape. She didn't push the thought away, but she didn't invite it to stay either. The road was enough. They came to a curve that always felt longer than it looked on the map. Wind had a favorite trick just there, to blow across the road as if the mountain breathed sideways. The drift on the right took a tabletop shape and overhung a little, the way frosting does when a cake cools. The plow's blade carved a neat channel through it and sent a soft, muted wall of snow down into the bank. The message board shifted its counsel. Reduce speed. The back of her neck prickled with that good, useful caution. She did as asked. At a shallow saddle just shy of the summit, the plow's lights flared bright, then dimmed, the way an animal might move its shoulders. The message snapped to a single word. Stop. Elena felt the weight of the word. She set her foot with care and brought her rig down from motion to rest. The world around her seemed to pause in mimicry. Snow fell at the same speed it always had, but the feeling of time changed, as if someone had set a hand on a second hand and slowed it. Through the falling white, she could make out a shape in the cut ahead, just a change in texture at road height. The mountain made a low, full sound then, a sound that didn't go through the ears but through the bones, like a breath released after being held too long. A sheet of snow slumped off the uphill bank and slid across both lanes in a slow, deliberate shrug. No roar, no drama, just a quiet, sizable fact of snow changing its mind about where it wanted to be. It came to rest knee-high, a harmless-looking barrier that would nevertheless laugh at a bumper. The plow idled, blade lifted. The message did not chatter. It held her where she needed to be. Then, as if it had waited for the last grain to settle, the board said hold. A moment later, the plow reversed, made a graceful three-point turn in the narrow world they shared, and began to carve the slide into neat, manageable bites. Over 10 careful minutes, it pushed the low drift aside until the road looked like itself again, only cleaner. The board changed to proceed with care, and then back to follow plow, do not pass. Elena let out a breath she had not realized she'd been saving and went on. Night road miles compress and stretch like rubber bands in weather like this. It could have been 15 minutes. It could have been 2 hours. The plow led. A few times the message board spoke with unusual specificity for a machine. Bridge icy, keep right, and later, watch crosswind, short gust. She obeyed. The steering told her the advice had been good, and she felt a little gratitude for words that landed like a hand on a tabletop to steady a vase. At an overlook she'd never seen in daylight, a darker absence opened off to the left where a guardrail should have shown its chain of reflectors. The plow hugged the right side. So did she. Whatever work had closed that edge had not been finished, and the mountain breathed a little more there. Beyond the summit, the road's personality changes. Descents invite a different kind of attention. Chains sing a song of small, regular thumps. The grade here has a runaway ramp Elena had never needed, and hoped never to consider. Tonight the sign for it glowed steady with snow framed on the edges. The plow cut left unexpectedly, onto a short service connector she had always assumed was locked with a swing gate. There was no gate. The message board said, detour, local only. She hesitated an honest second, then followed. The connector dipped behind a rock outcrop that made a brief, dark cave of the world, then rose again to meet the highway a quarter-mile further on, below the next long curve. When they regained the main lanes, she saw why. Down the grade visible for a brief page of seconds before the snow turned the distance, opaque hazard lights pulsed in a slow, solemn rhythm. Shapes stood still in the wrong places. Not chaos, not long delay, nothing loud. Just the unhappy geometry of a rig that had found ice and had seen the horizon from a strange angle. It rested against the snow-filled shoulder, cab straight, trailer cocked just a little. Headlamps glowed. A human figure moved in that careful, slow way that means everyone is okay and figuring out how to unbraid a problem. Elena's chest warmed with a simple relief for strangers. The mountain had made room where none had been. The plow kept the pace. Past the trouble, the grade wore a more livable expression. At the next maintenance turnout, chain-link fence half-draped in white, the plow eased in and idled. The message board went blank. For a breath, Elena considered pulling in behind to thank the driver with a flick of her lights, that old language of the road. But the snow had a way of closing space, as if it had never existed. The world held steady a moment longer. Then the plow's lights dimmed to nothing. She rolled on, another mile to a wide, old-fashioned truck pull-off. A small lodge sat above it, dark except for a single front window, where a lamp burned with that deliberate welcome that makes passing drivers feel seen. Elena set her brake and let the truck settle. Her hands rested on the wheel a long second before she realized she had not unclenched her jaw for a while. She smiled at herself, breathed, and stepped out into the padded quiet. Snow softened the lot to a blank page. Her boot prints drew themselves as she walked to the lodge's porch. A handwritten sign told of coffee inside for drivers when the open flag hung, which it did not. She stood under the awning and watched the highway be a thin, moving idea of itself through the trees. A few minutes later, a pickup with a state emblem on the door swung in, engine ticking, and two figures in reflective jackets climbed out. Their faces were the particular pink of people who have worked outdoors a long time. "You caught that squall," one said, nodding up toward the summit. No surprise in his voice, just recognition. "Your plow got me over," Elena said, lifting a hand in thanks toward the mountain as if that might send the gratitude uphill. The sign said follow. Blade cleared a slide. Took that little connector below the curve. "With the light board?" the other asked, eyebrows up a notch. "Who was running it?" "I didn't see," Elena admitted. Cab windows were all reflection. Unit numbers weren't clear in the snow. It led well. The men glanced at each other. One of them gave a little half-laugh that sounded more like acknowledgement than humor. "We pulled the fleet down for the hour," he said. Visibility went sideways right as the crews hit their brake. "We were staging them at the yard past mile 117. Maybe one stayed up. If you got through clean, we're glad." They offered her a thermos pour, and the kind of conversation that warms more than coffee can. Road talk, conditions, what's open, who's waiting at the bottom for news. She shared what she had seen at the trouble spot downgrade, no injuries, just a stubborn angle and a lot of blinking lights. They nodded and said they'd send a support truck. When she climbed back into the cab, she felt lighter, not because anything had become less serious, but because the night had shown its working hands. She put the rig into gear and took the road's hand again. The maintenance yard mentioned sat with its gate open and its lamps turned the color of baked bread. Racks of chains stood in orderly ranks. A row of plows rested under a long shed, big orange shoulders all in a line. As she rolled by, her lights brushed over their backs and the numbers stenciled near the doors. One of the center units wore a board on its back, dark as anything asleep. Snow had banked itself against its plow in a way that said it hadn't moved in hours. For a blink, the message board's face caught her headlights just so, and she had the fleeting sense of letters trying to make themselves known, not words, just the suggestion of a word, like a mouth forming thank you behind glass. The radio cracked with a traffic spot out of the valley. "Mountain Pass remains open," the announcer said, voice calm. "Crews advise caution and reduced speed. Expect brief delays. Near mile 119. Elena touched the heater dial a notch warmer. The chains sang their small song. Down below, the road began the long, gentle swing toward the river towns, where roofs would be bright with the fresh snow in the morning. Above, behind a curtain she had just crossed, the mountain went on making itself, a perfect machine with no instructions except the ones it gave itself, and shared in small ways with people who listened. At the last pullout before the grade eased, she stopped to walk the rig and check the chain's tension. Snow fluffed up around her ankles in sweet, squeaking sounds. On the front bumper, low, caught in a seam of metal by luck and friction, a tiny cap gleamed a round reflective tip from a stake, the kind that snaps onto the top so a plow's light can find it. It must have come loose and traveled with her. She plucked it free. Up close, in her gloved palm, it reflected her headlamp back at her in a little starburst. She set it carefully on the dash when she climbed in, not as a trophy, just as a small, polite piece of night that had decided to stay. The rest of the descent took on the feeling all good descents have: a permission. She eased off the grade, let the engine slow her without complaint, and watched the world open from white tunnel to proper valley. The first houses wore halos on their roofs. A dog in a fenced yard barked once at the big machine gliding by, and then thought better of it and settled. The river ran black and quick, under a skin of steam. The snow kept falling, gentler now, and the highway became a ribbon again. Sometimes the road's helpers are obvious cones and signs and people in bright jackets making sense of complicating things. Sometimes they arrive without fanfare, a pattern of stakes that seems to lean just where you need it to, a message board's advice that reads more like a voice, a path that opens behind a rock face you'd never noticed in daylight. Elena didn't try to name it. She drove on with the careful peace of someone who had been looked after, and allowed to look after herself, both truths sitting well together like two mugs on a table cooling at their own pace. Story number 8. The river valley wore a low ceiling that night, a lid of cloud that held the light of far-off towns and turned the horizon into a soft glow. Theo had taken the river route because the mountains had thrown weather behind him, and out here the air stayed warmer and the lanes wider. He drove a box trailer full of office chairs, oddly comforting cargo, all those patient seats tucked in rows behind him, wrapped in plastic like raincoats. The truck was balanced and well-behaved, the cruise set gentle, the heater breathing a steady warmth that smelled faintly of dust and coffee. Past midnight, the floodplain spread on both sides in a dark hush. Winter reeds bowed their heads in the ditches. Water in low pockets shivered under a thin skin, not fully frozen but thinking about it. Far out to the south, cranes stood sleeping at a port's edge, red obstruction lights blinking in slow agreement. The highway was lifted in a long run of viaducts over the wetlands. Long concrete fingers with even seams. The sound of tires became smooth and resonant, more like a room than a road. Theo kept one eye on the mirrors, and the other on the reach of his low beams. The CB was down to a murmur. He liked the quiet. Out here, the small things came forward. The slight whistle at the top of the driver's side window at certain crosswinds. The click of a loose button on the shifter boot when the truck hit a perfect joint in the concrete. The way the glow from the gauges felt like a lamp in a kitchen, you know very well. The first flasher he didn't think twice about. A rig sat on the shoulder with hazards on, no hood up, no triangles out, just a slow, ordinary blink. He checked speed, checked lane, gave it a little room. The second appeared not half a mile later. Another truck, same polite pulse. He thought, maybe a convoy stopping in turns. He had seen it before, drivers leapfrogging a problem by watching one another's mirrors. He eased over a lane and gave them space. By the third, something tugged at the edge of his attention. The cadence matched the first two exactly. Not close, not similar exact. Like a metronome. Hazards vary from truck to truck. It's part of the odd chemistry of vehicles. Flasher modules age. LEDs and bulbs blink at different rhythms. But these shared a beat, as if they had compared watches. Theo adjusted the radio down until the room of the cab felt almost like a held breath. He listened to the tick-click of his own hazard switch as he touched it once, briefly, to test the sound. He did not turn them on, not yet, just put the idea of the rhythm into his ears. Ahead, the shoulder lights pulsed again, 3 now, set far apart, but somehow keeping the same count like people who can sing harmony across a distance. The interchange after the levee was poorly lit on the best of nights. Tonight, the overhead sign lamps were out, a maintenance job delayed. A single portable message board stood dark on its trailer, not running. The exit gore appeared as a darker triangle in the gray wash of the world. Theo had made this one on less light. He knew the shape. Still, as he approached, the shoulder hazard on the right sped up just a shade, a heartbeat quicker, and the one on the left matched it, as if passing a baton. He slowed. It wasn't a spook reaction, just caution's hand on the shoulder. As he came level with the off-ramp's throat, he saw the hazard for what it had likely meant. A wide, familiar smear of sand, laid by a maintenance crew earlier in the evening, spread across the main lane where oil had spilled from some earlier mishap. The sand was heavy and safe to roll over at speed, but the dark patch glistened under it. Sand and oil make a puzzle for steer tires. If you're a little too quick, and the surface asks a question suddenly, Theo welcomed the heads up he might have given himself anyway. He slid by careful, a breath slower than he would have been. He told himself a story that kept things ordinary. The rigs on the shoulder could be working together. Maybe they had put hazards on to warn of the patch. Maybe they were sleeping off their hours and helping anyone passing with a little extra light. It sat well. He let it sit. Miles stretched. The viaduct lifted again over a broader sheet of wetland. The sky to the east flickered once, far-off lightning that made the ceiling look painted on. The next shoulder truck appeared in the little canyon of his beams. A tanker, clean in the lines, no company name on the barrel. Its hazards joined the quiet choir. The beat held exact. Theo counted it out now without wanting to 1 to 2, 1 to 2, pause, 1 to 2, and felt the oddness of it settle in him. The way you notice the car ahead of you has a dent, and then begin to see dents everywhere. At the long curve that faced the old grain silos, the pattern changed. The tanker's lights did a quick double. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1. Out on the left shoulder, far ahead, another rig answered with the same. Theo felt the hairs across his forearms lift in a way that was not fear and not comfort either, something closer to the feeling when a flock of birds turns all at once, and you only realize you were holding your breath when they finish the move. He moved to the right lane and eased off the throttle. Around the bend, tucked just beyond the sightline, a short row of orange barrels pinched the left lane for 100 feet where a maintenance crew had cut a slot in the shoulder earlier that day and covered it. Nothing dramatic, nothing fate testing. In daylight, it would have been obvious at distance. Tonight, it wanted a small, kind courtesy. He gave it. And he watched the hazards on the left shoulder return to the metronome beat, after he passed as if whatever little message they had needed to deliver was done. Theo skipped a rest area without meaning to. He saw the sign 2 miles, then 1, and he had meant to stop and stretch and open the trailer door a finger to let the night settle there a second. But the sequence of lights at the on-ramps ahead drew his attention. A quiet morse of trucks at rest, breathing hazard light in a slow, shared song. He told himself he would stop at the next one. He drove on. A mile after the rest area, the road rose onto a bridge that slung itself over the widest water on this stretch, a place where the river threw off loops and looped back, making islands of its own ideas. Here, the wind had room to practice, and it permitted itself a cross-breath now and again. Theo kept both hands easy on the wheel and felt the gentle shoulder check of air on the trailer. Up ahead on the right, parked just beyond the bridge sign and well out of the way, a day cab with a flatbed sat with its hazard lamps working. As Theo came up, those lights did another small, undeniable pattern. They stepped faster, like a drummer rolling a tiny fill, and held. He slowed again. If there had been traffic, the whole thing might have felt like a live demonstration, but the night had emptied itself. His rig and the resting ones had the world to themselves. He felt alone and not alone. Midspan, at the rise, the crosswind sharpened nothing violent, just a packed gust. His trailer leaned a polite degree and settled. In the left lane, a light scrap of something pallet wrap or a long ribbon of plastic skittered across, lifted, and then jerked toward him, as if it had noticed he had not been asked whether he wanted to meet it. He held his line. The plastic kissed the bumper and left a squeak of sound, then went its own way. It was nothing. It felt like practice for something else. And then, the moment was over. On the far side, he set his jaw to release tension he hadn't known was there. A turnoff appeared for a scenic pullout he had seen 100 times in daylight, the one with the metal sign that featured a little engraved fish. Another truck sat there, hazards on. Theo downshifted one, not because he needed to, but because the small ritual felt like respect. The truck's lamps matched tempo and eased back to plane. A dot or two of taillights came into mirror distance, then fell away. He could have keyed the CB and asked if any of the guys on the shoulder needed tools or water or a call. He didn't. It wasn't neglect. It was an intuition that the act of asking would change the way the night fit together. He let the odd pattern live without name. Near the county line, the shoulder rose onto a section of viaduct that made a noise of its own, the concrete joints a fraction closer together so the tires made a quicker song. In that faster rhythm, the hazards on 4 rigs in a row, 2 on the right, 2 on the left, fell into a sync, so complete it was like someone had drawn a box around that part of the world and asked the lights to be a metronome. Theo did something simple and curious then. He reached and thumbed his own hazard switch on for a single blink. His lamps joined the beat without needing to settle. 1, 2, pause, 1 to 2. He switched them off right away, a little embarrassed as if he had spoken in a quiet church. He waited to see if the shoulder chorus would change. They held steady. He smiled at the wheel, a kind of private smile that had nothing to do with jokes. The interstates braided briefly near an old steel truss bridge above a narrower, darker spur of water. Work was happening at the crossover, the kind that looks longer than it is when it's framed by night. Portable arrow boards pointed the way, steady and unambiguous. Theo lined up for the right fork and took it slow. The arrow boards were fine, but the hazard lights of the resting trucks did a second job the boards couldn't. They lit the shape of the empty lanes beyond the point where the board's own glare made the world a bright wash. They were spaced in such a way that the emptiness between them was more visible than the light itself. The void drew the eye. The void became the path. The night, which had grown soft with weather and distance, felt like it was teaching him how to see. He came up on a car in the left lane moving a hair too slow, the kind that makes passing feel like a conversation. He gave ample room. He signaled early. His turn signal tick matched the hazard chorus as he drifted right to complete the pass and then left to resume. The car stayed in its lane and remained in its own world. The highway stretched. An hour on, past a shuttered outlet mall whose facade still wore cheerful colors no one saw at night. The hazards did something that broke pattern. A row of rigs at a dead-end access road, parked nose to tail, lit and then stayed lit. No blink. Steady amber. Theo's chest did a small, involuntary thud. Steady hazard lights are rare. They can mean a malfunction. They can mean a driver turned the four ways on, and the flasher froze. They can mean nothing at all. Here, all at once, they meant stop. He complied. His foot came down clean. The trailer listened and stayed straight. He rolled to a neat halt, 100 yards shy of an upcoming rail crossing he had not expected to be active at that hour. The gates were up, no cantilever lights flashing. The crossbuck signs were bare. But in the quiet, a very low hum grew, the kind that seems to creep up from under the road. The hum became a thrum. The crossing lights blinked awake a breath later out of sequence with their hum, as if the sound had arrived before their electricity, and then the gates dipped. A short, unassuming train, a maintenance consist, trundled through at a slow, careful pace. No horns, no urgency. A pair of workers sat in the tiny cab looking like men reading a map in a well-lit room. The last car passed, a flat with a spool as big as a house laid on its side. The gates rose. The hazard lights on the row of rigs went back to ordinary like a crowd resuming a conversation after a toast. Theo rolled on, a small wave of relief trailing behind. Not because he had narrowly avoided anything, but because the smoothness of the warning matched the smoothness of the fix. The night had changed gears gently. At the next rest area, he decided to stop. The need to stretch had become a polite insistence. He pulled into a long slot near the end and set the brakes. The lot lay easy under sodium lamps. A half-dozen trucks sat spaced out, each with hazards dark now. He climbed down, the cold coming up through the soles of his boots, and walked a lazy loop to shake off the shape the seat had pressed into him. He noticed, as he passed the nearest rig, that the hazard lamp lenses on the rear corners were warm. Heat from electronics lingers in sensible ways, but the warmth felt like a hand had just left them. He touched his own a habit, checked a strap on a spare tire, tightened a catwalk latch that liked to rattle, and breathed air that smelled faintly of river mud and diesel and wet leaves. Inside the restroom building, someone had left a coffee brewing, likely a maintenance crew cutting through. The little TV in the corner played a looped weather forecast without sound. The caption scrolled, "River fog advisory until 4 a.m. Use caution on elevated roadways." Theo read it and smiled at the understatement. Back in the cab, he sat a minute without starting the engine, letting the silence pour in. The hazard rhythm he had been leaning into had left a little ghost of itself in his head, like a song after a concert. He considered taking the couch in the sleeper for 20 minutes, but the schedule was honest and he was awake. He started the truck. The night consented. 2 miles down from the rest area, as if to welcome him back, a lone truck on the shoulder blinked its hazards. The beat, however, had changed. It was slower now, like a tired clock. It didn't ask for anything. It held time. Theo drove in that measured way you drive, when you're conscious of being treated gently. At the long split where the interstate divided toward the coastal cities, a portable message board lit itself awake, just long enough to show, "Detour. Bridge work, expect delays." Then went dark again. The hazard chorus had thinned. The shoulder lay empty in long, peaceful stretches. When a parked rig did appear, its lights matched no one but themselves. Theo took the detour. The route skimmed the edge of an industrial park with low buildings and unlit signs that by daylight would be cheerful. At the far end, a way station unexpectedly glowed with life. "Open," said the sign. He rolled in, slow, steady, treating the scale with the respect everyone does whether they're heavy or light. The speaker crackled. "Evening, driver," a calm voice said. "How's the road?" "Quiet," Theo replied, speaking toward the dash. "Fog on the viaduct. A few signals out. We've got a quick hold while they clear a stuck oversize off the main span," the voice said. "Matter of fact, no drama. Should be 10 minutes. You can stage in lane 2 if you like." He eased to the staging lane, grateful for the pause he hadn't been brave enough to name. Across the lot, state trucks idled white, with little logos on the door. One had its hazard lights on, steady. Another joined it. For a breath, they matched. Then one fell out of sync and blinked its own way. Theo leaned back, hands open on his thighs. The world felt very simple. After 9 minutes, the voice came back, thanked him, and sent him on. He rolled off the scale and back out to the highway. At the merge, a tow with a rotating bar of amber ushered an enormous flatbed off the span, its load wrapped in white like a sleeping whale. Traffic unfurled. An hour later, the lid of cloud thinned and dawn put a quiet line of pearl at the edge of the world. Birds found their voices. The river gave off a wet breath that turned sound small. Theo checked his mirrors, checked his gauges, and thought about how many machines in the night learn to care about each other because they are asked to share the same thin lines. When he stopped for fuel outside a town where a diner made a fine lemon pie, he caught a news tidbit on the pump screen, one of those tiny square videos with captions. A DOT spokesperson talked about a pilot program using occupancy sensors in rest areas and staging points to coordinate hazard lights during closures and detours. "It helps drivers space out and see the shape of a route when visibility is reduced," the caption said. The footage showed a neat animation and a diagram with little amber dots moving in a line. Theo watched it to the end, then looked out over the highway where the morning had made the world ordinary again. He wasn't sure if what he'd seen fit the program. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. It didn't matter. He finished fueling, wiped his hands, and climbed back into the cab. The road had a rhythm whether people gave it one or not. Last night, it had borrowed a little amber to make the beat easier to hear. He knew, without deciding exactly how, that sometime on some other fog-lidded night, miles from anywhere and with the river smelling like iron and leaves, he would tap his own hazard switch once in greeting, let his lights blink in time with whatever else was out there, and then turn them off again, satisfied, and keep going. And that's where tonight's journey ends. 8 unbelievable horror trucker stories from the highways where reality bends and shadows never sleep. Somewhere out there, another rig hums through the dark, carrying a story no one would ever believe. If these tales sent chills down your spine, give this video a like. It helps us keep the wheels turning through the night. And if you're new here, subscribe to The Sleep Haunt so you never miss another drive into the strange and the unknown. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road, your lights bright, and your doors locked. Good night, and safe travels wherever the miles may lead.